scrutiny. Before we do anything else, can I just check that those online can hear, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the agenda pack with papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council website from the link that was sent out to members. When you're invited to speak, could you please state clearly who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so that I can identify who is speaking, and ensure, if you would please, that you use your microphones if you are in the room. The meeting will be audio recorded by the council. As agendas are now viewed electronically, please will you refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everybody present in finding the appropriate information. There is no expected fire alarm, but should this happen, please follow the Democratic Services officers and they will lead the way out. After this meeting, there will be another this afternoon for Innovation Wave 2 workshop, 2 o'clock in this room, and it will also be accessible online with members of the Children Education Scrutiny Committee and Audit Committees also in attendance. Absolutely on cue, can I welcome Sue Osborne back to this committee? Very good to see you, Sue. Can I note that we have apology, well, time will tell, Sue. Can I note that we've got apologies also from Councillor Andy Soughton. Are there any others, please?
Good morning, everyone. No, that's the only apology we have received for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the previous meeting. Can I say what entertaining reading they made? A proper narrative. It was very, very worthwhile spending that time reading. Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. At the bottom of page 15, 3 lines up, it says that the lead member for finance had been required to leave the meeting. That means we asked her to leave, which we didn't. It needs to be reworded to say had to leave the meeting for another meeting or something like that. And while we're at it, I think Councillor Hophouse should say something about his shirt or apologise for it.
Mr. Chairman, my shirt is because I'm on my bike and I want people to see me. I'm sorry I didn't bring a plainer shirt because Councillor Mike Stanton can't cope with something this bright.
Well, it is, Henry, yellow.
Had we been warned, Councillor Hophouse, we would all have brought our dark glasses. But very colourful nonetheless. Other than that, one amendment. Is everybody happy with the minutes? May I see all those in favour, please? Yeah, thank you. Are there any matters arising from them that anybody wants to address at this point? Councillor Stanton.
Yes, I probably ought to raise this again in relation to the forward work plan, but we agreed to reconsider the issue of LCNs and inviting elected Somerset Council members to vote on each LCN and whether they wanted to continue with them or not. We deferred that to the 9th of September. So I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost.
Okay. Right, thank you. I'll make sure that doesn't get lost. Is there anything else? Right, thank you. Any declarations of interest, please, that any member wishes to draw to our attention? Okay. Public question time. I haven't actually been advised of any public questions today. Councillor Osborne.
I'm pretty certain when I was reading the agenda, I could be mistaken, but I think there was a public question for Theo but Philip, but he'd also provided a written answer. Oh, that was last time. Oh, sorry.
No. That's fine, thank you. So we'll move then, if we may, to agenda item 5, which is the scrutiny outcome tracker. And can I invite Mr. Latkovich to present this, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the in front of you is the latest outcome tracker. At this point I haven't got anything to add or comment on it. I am aware that councillors Trimnell and Martin would like to give you further update on the outcome of the executive meeting, where they considered the report from the council tax reduction scheme task and finish group. But unless any of members would wish to comment on any items from the outcome tracker before you may want to hand over to councillors Trimnell and Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Latkovich. Is there anything else that anybody would like to refer to? Yes, Councillor Stanton.
Same point, community working review on page 38. It doesn't say that we decided to reconsider the question of LCNs and councillors voting whether they wanted them or not on the 9th of September, at our meeting on the 9th of September.
I asked Councillor Lovell, Trimble, to do their act. I understand that you had actually a very good reception as executive, and I was very interested to read minutes of the executive.
Excellent reception, I think we can.
Yes.
Like the reception you gave us in our terms. So celebrity status. Thank you. What the purpose of bringing this up now is that we realise that from the task and finish group and prompted by officers that there is a bit of unfinished business in discussing the whole area of exceptional hardship. And so we feel that a group of people needs to take this on. We're happy for it to be the members of the existing task and finish group. And I think we'd like to include Councillor Legislation in this. But to this end, we will set up with Jack's help a meeting of a working group sometime in August. And obviously we will do some work and we will report back to this committee at the first, well, I suppose it needs to be fairly prompt. So if we can get a slot in September, I think that would be very useful, but that is the plan.
Okay.
I did stress that, I mean, yes, we covered off the various disregards and all the things about this, but that was the bit that was left in the air. We felt we needed a bit more attention.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Trimble, anything you want to add?
No, not really. Just that it will be a single one-off meeting, and a lot of the time, a lot of the changes that we were proposing should go to consultation. When we talked about them, we talked about how exceptional hardship scheme could pick up some of those who really were in need. And then I think we became aware at the end of the executive process that maybe we just need to make sure that we are thorough at looking at everything. And if the executive hardship scheme is to be that sort of that catch-all point, we need to make sure it's sound. So that's why we're doing it, but nothing else to add other than that.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. And can I thank you both and the task and finish group again, because you did a magnificent job and you absolutely fulfilled the expectations that we had when we were doing the scrutiny review last year of how a task and finish group could and should work. So excellent work on behalf of the members, and can I thank the officers who supported us as well, at which point, Mr. Latkovich.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to confirm that we just now have added an item for September meeting related to council tax reduction scheme consultation feedback to be presented to the scrutiny, where we also can update the committee with the outcome of the one-off meeting with the working group. And I think it's what Councillors Trimnell and Martin Lowell suggested is that inclusion of the lead member to sit on a working group for that one-off meeting is a really good idea because we can hear back straight away from the lead member and the relevant officers on the exceptional hardship part of the scheme as well, and then making sure that all of those comments, we have mixed comments, from both, the scrutiny as well as the lead member, will help officers, to draft the report, for November and December. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. So unless there's anything else then on the outcome tracker and the task and finish group. Thank you. We'll move on then, if we may, to item 6, which is the Section 106 and Community Infrastructure Levy update and report. And can I just say, by way of background, we've become aware of the fact that other authorities do look in one way or another at the infrastructure funding statement, which is published annually by local authorities. And it seems appropriate that that is scrutinised somewhere in the council process. So this is our opportunity to begin to do this. Other members, the Vice Chair, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, are particularly interested in this item and have asked for this to be on the agenda as well. So this is something where we're taking the initiative in asking for something to come forward. I'm going to invite Kate Murdoch, who is the Service Manager for Strategic Policy and Implementation, please, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, so I'm just going to take members through what the current situation is for the Somerset Council area in terms of Community Infrastructure Levy and Section 106 and how these are kind of controlled also nationally. Yeah, why is that not gone into presentation mode up there? No, I don't think. Let's stop again. Still not going into presentation mode up there, but it is on my screen. Ah, it's come through. Sorry. Thank you. There might be a delay as I'm skipping through the slides by the looks of things. Yep, great. So by way of background, we've got, let's minimize that. We've got 3 SIL charging areas in Somerset. The SIL stands for the Community Infrastructure Levy. It's charged in the former Sedgemoor area, the former Taunton Dean area, so not the whole of the former Somerset Western Taunton. The former West Somerset area doesn't have SIL, and the former South Somerset area. So we currently don't charge SIL in either the former Mendip or the former West Somerset area. So the Community Infrastructure Levy is a per square metre charge on qualifying development, and I'll go through some more slides that will explain in each of the areas what's classified as qualifying development. But please be aware that there's also several exemptions from SIL. So self-build is exempt from SIL, but they have to follow the right process to ensure they get exemption. Affordable housing is exempt from paying SIL, And in some circumstances where there's viability issues, developers can claim exceptional circumstances relief. The community infrastructure levy allows the council to apply 5% of all SIL that's collected in that year to cover. That's the staffing costs and also the Exacom system that we use to monitor SIL liability payments. Monitor agreements. And 15% of community infrastructure levy receipts can go to the local town and parish council where it's collected, and that increases to 25% where there's a neighbourhood plan in place. That cap of £100 is very rarely applied because it's unusual that you get big development in very, very small settlements. SIL can only be spent in the charging area that it's collected, and obviously on kind of strategic infrastructure that excludes affordable housing, so you can't spend SIL on delivering affordable housing. But obviously the key thing to remember is that SIL in section 106 it can be pooled, but ultimately there's only one pot of money. So we often use the analogy when you're looking at developments, there's a cake and the cake doesn't get any bigger. What we're finding quite often is the ask of that cake is getting bigger, but the proportion that is allocated and available for improving infrastructure is fairly fixed. So Section 106 agreements, by contrast, they apply across all the areas. So we have Section 106 agreements in the whole of Somerset. They have to be, so the limitations with Section 106 is they have to be specific to the planning permission. So they are taken through the planning committee route, and that's where they are scrutinised as such by the planning committee. So they're set out the terms of the Section 106 as part of any committee report. And they have to make sure that they satisfy the 3 legal tests that are set out there. So they have to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. So you can't just ask for something if there isn't a direct link to that development. Again, it has to be directly related to the development, and it's got to be fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind. So you can't expect a relatively small scale development to say pay for a brand new school. They might make a contribution towards expanding a school or a contribution towards a new school, and the same with a health facility. So this table is just to kind of set out what's being collected to date in terms of the strategic SIL funds across the 3 areas where we're charging it. What's been applied by way of 5% admin, and remember that can only be applied in the year that it's collected. If there's any kind of excess amount, it goes into the strategic pot to support infrastructure. And then you can see there the overall amounts that have been handed over to town and parish councils. And they have to spend that to support the development of their area. And then you can see just there what's being collected to date. But I'll talk you through each of the areas and where that funding is being allocated. So for the former South Somerset area, it's charged in all residential developments, excluding the Chard Eastern Development Area and the Yeovil Sustainable Urban Extensions. So the large scale developments in Yeovil and Chard do not have SIL applied. And they're all charged on convenience-based supermarkets and retail warehouse parks. But given the decline in retail, we don't really see an awful lot of those now in terms of SIL payments coming forward. Now, the SIL charging rate that you see on the left-hand side is what it was set at when it was independently examined. So when SIL's introduced, there's an independent examination. It's all viability tested by independent consultants and then tested by the examiner. So in the 1st of April 2017, it was set at £40 per square metre. That is then index linked. So the BCIS index is applied on an annual basis. And you can see now that if a development was granted in this year, they'd be paying £56.94 per square metre. So that index linking applies each year. It's rare that it ever goes down. It, you know, in most instances, it's going up. And that's to ensure that the rate stays in line with inflation and is able to then support the delivery of infrastructure, because obviously we've got increasing costs. So in the South Somerset area, you can see what's being collected to date there at the top of the table. A large proportion of the SIL that's been collected to date has been allocated to supporting town centre, Yeovil Town Centre public realm improvements and the Child Leisure Centre. We've got an allocation there for forward funding some of the active travel measures at Mudford. That hasn't been spent as such, but it's effectively committed. And then you can see the available balance for the former South Somerset area. For the former Sedgemoor area, same table as you've just seen for South Somerset. Slightly different insofar as they also charge still on hotel developments. You've got your usual convenience retail there. And in terms of residential, it's got two separate rates. So they've got the Bridgewater and Burnham on Highbridge rate, and then they've got residential for all other areas. So anything outside of those areas is at that higher rate. And again, the table's the same. You can see the original SIL charging rate that was set at the examination when it was implemented in April 2015. And then the column on the right just shows with indexing what that current rate has increased to. So if a development was permitted in this year, and apologies, that's not been updated to 2026, that table, but it is the rates correct. So in terms of the former Sedgemoor area where the funding's been allocated, so the former Sedgemoor Council allocated some small grant schemes, which totaled 222,000. They were mainly kind of community-based projects. I've not listed them all there. But the major allocation of SIL in the former Sedgemoor area is to the Bridgewater tidal barrier. There's also a major contribution towards the new build of the Wilstock Primary and expansion of the existing Puritan Primary School. In terms of Taunton Deane charging rates, again, same table as you've seen with the previous ones. The column in the middle explains what the rate is as at the 1st of April 2014 when it'd been through an independent examination. And the rate on the right, and apologies, that table's not been updated. It should say the 1st of January 2026 to the 31st of December 2026. Shows the rates that are now applied if a development is permitted in this calendar year, and it runs by calendar years, not financial years. In terms of what's been spent from the SIL strategic pot in the Taunton Deane area, there's been the Taunton Station improvements, the coal orchard development, which is in the town centre in terms of public realm improvements. There was an allocation to support Wellington Town Council with purchasing some land to increase the availability and access of public open space. And also a significant contribution towards the new build primary school that's now open and functioning in the Orchard Grove development to the southwest of Taunton. Now you can see at the bottom there's quite a significant allocation that's still available, but I'll just explain where those are allocated at the moment. So a slightly different situation in terms of the former Somerset West and Taunton. We used to allocate to specific projects to enable the project, the programme managers to bid for additional funding to help with the delivery. So where you've got match funding through SIL, it can help support the case for drawing in additional investment through government grant schemes. So we've got allocations to cycle and pedestrian improvements, and you can see the future financial years where they're allocated. Some to Taunton Town Centre regeneration. A large proportion is allocated to some of the Taunton Town Centre flood schemes. There's allocation to assist with the delivery of the community facilities at the Orchard Grove development, and a significant allocation towards, which is more as a forward funding loan to help delivery of the access road to Wellington Station, which is now actually being developed and delivered by the developers, but it also assists with supporting infrastructure, so some of the cycle links improvements around the station. But we make these allocations in future years, and that's what we're proposing to do with the former South Somerset and the former Sedgemoor area, to enable the officers that are delivering some of these capital projects to then go out and seek additional funding through funding bids. In terms of the future situation, so the government, or the previous government, commissioned a full review of SIL and found that it wasn't actually raising the quantum of money that was expected. They were proposing to introduce a new infrastructure levy through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. And the review obviously found that developers preferred Section 106 over SIL for large mixed-use sites. And the current government has stated that they won't be introducing the infrastructure levy, and as yet there's no kind of clear approach in terms of whether they are looking to review SIL and Section 106 in terms of planning obligations, because there are kind of positives and negatives of both. But it's just to remind members that every year we publish the infrastructure funding statements. We have to do that, we're required to do that, and it sets out what's being collected in the previous December 2026. It will look at the financial year of the 1st of April 25 through to the end of March 2026. That sets out what's being collected to date and where the funding has been spent in that year and what Section 106 agreements the council has entered into and the obligations that are agreed in them. And that's it in terms of questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Officer Murdoch. Could I just ask about the council share? Are they limited in what they can spend their money on? Significant amount, which I hadn't quite computed, that is actually going to them. And I did notice that you said that one of the allocations in the former Taunton Deane area was to Wellington Town Council. So are we effectively double supporting there, but giving money to Wellington Town Council, and they were getting money from the SIL anyway?
So, no, sorry, Wellington is actually 0 rated. So the Wellington Town Council area in the independent examination showed that it wasn't a viable area to be charging SIL. So they don't actually get SIL because it's 0 rated. But so at the time there was a significant area of land that was available, and the former Somerset West and Taunton Council supported the purchase of that land to improve public open space.
Okay, but coming back to it then, are parishes and towns limited as to what they can spend the money on?
Not as limited as we are with the strategic pot. So it's to the SIL regulations say it's to support the development area, the development of the area, or anything else that they see as appropriate, essentially. So, and I can recognise that there looks like there's quite significant sums that some parishes have got, and that is true. But some parishes will get something like kind of 13,000, and there's not which which limits your ability to deliver anything kind of significant. So again, through the infrastructure funding statement, you can see what each of the parishes have spent their money on. So some have chosen to purchase speed cameras and speed control things, right through to making improvements to some of the public rights of way and improvements to gates that need replacing, to improving their village hall facilities. So quite a vast range of things that you can see some of the town and parish councils have spent their SIL money on.
And final one then, as we've got the Taunton Dean one there before us, presumably Taunton Town Council now is eligible to receive a fair chunk of that funding. So of what sort of scale would they, for instance, be having?
I haven't got the figures to hand, but they are, again, they're published every year. So I would imagine they've had, you know, probably quite a significant relative to the number, but not all the development. Staple Road development hasn't yet come forward. So their major contribution, because the centre of Taunton is 0 rated, to support some of the brownfield sites forward, because it wasn't viable to charge SIL. So their major contributions are the more strategic sites, like at the moment the Orchard Grove one.
Okay, right, thank you. I've got a number of speakers now. Councillor Holphouse.
Parish meetings, and there seem to be no way of contacting them to tell them that they have a SIL contribution, and that in one case I know they have got a SIL contribution, but nowhere is it publicly acknowledged to them. So on the website it doesn't say what the SIL contribution is going to be, and as I said, they've got no clerk to chase through any of the information. How are you telling them what the parish meeting is due, and how are they supposed to spend it?
So the SIL payments are made in April and October every year, but the parish council will only get it
Parish meeting.
if we've collected it.
Okay.
So if the development that's SIL liable has started, has commenced, and the SIL money has come into the council, they will get a payment in April and October every year. If the development hasn't commenced, or if there's some legal issues with them not paying and we're having to pursue legal action, then there'll be a delay in their payment. But we contact parish councils when the payments are due, and they'll get transferred. In terms of the money that's been allocated to parish councils, that's published every year in the infrastructure funding statement.
Okay.
But if they're waiting for clarity in terms of what money is available, suggest that they email the planning obligations email.
The problem, Kate, is this is a parish meeting without a bank account. They have no parish clerk to actually be told what their SIL payment is. How do they find out the information when they only meet once a year?
They email the planning obligations email to find out what it is that's due to them.
Okay, and where do they take money from the council to put it into?
Well, they'll need to sort out a bank account. Well, we can't transfer the money if they haven't got a. So
by definition, they don't have a bank account, a parish meeting.
Well, then therein lies. I don't know where we would transfer the money if they don't have.
I'm going to ask Councillor Sieve to come in, if that's okay. Peter.
Chairman, I was going to suggest that Officer Woolrich explained the legal position for a parish meeting. It is not a council, and the regulations allow councils with to receive funds, but meetings are only a meeting of the people in a parish area. They are not a parish council, and they can't have assets, bank accounts. They have no officers. They have no proper officer. They're unconstituted associations, in effect, chaired by somebody.
is why it's actually a good reason for communities in this situation to consider setting up a parish council. Do you want to add anything to that, or was that was pretty comprehensive?
It was, again, just to show the distinction between a parish meeting versus parish and town councils in terms of their corporate body. The only thing I would highlight, though, there is a difference, though, in parish meetings in the sense that the corporate body concerned for a parish meeting is the principal council for the area. In that instance, that is Somerset Council. So there is a duty upon Somerset Council to work with those parish meetings in those instances.
Can't hear you very well.
All right, sorry. So again, there is just that distinction in the sense that parish meetings are not like parish councils and town councils. They are not corporate bodies. In the instance of a parish meeting, the principal council for the area does have a corporate body responsibility and role to work with what is in effect the only official for a parish meeting, who is the chair of the parish meeting. So there is a responsibility on the principal council, which in this instance is Somerset Council, to work through. And I do know of other parish meetings in other parts of the southwest which are and have been doing some examples which I know Kate has just outlined, and some of them do have similar arrangements and they do have counts in order to apply. So I do know that there are ways in which parish meetings can help facilitate the delivery, what Kate has just outlined.
Peter?
Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. I think in this particular case, the regulations are the critical thing. And I think the regulation that grants some of the funding from SIL to a parish council is to a parish council. It's not to anything else. However, obviously, if the funding raised in an area is still in the hands of the principal authority, the responsibility can still be discharged as you've just described. But I'm not sure that it's ring fenced to the parish area in the case where you've only got a meeting. And I would say that this is an area where we should be careful what goes onto the regulation list for what SIL can be spent on, because as a principal authority, you know, one of our predecessors, South Somerset, found itself faced with a water supply problem in Avashays that weren't on the mains. It would have been an ideal thing that could have been funded through SIL had sufficient SIL been raised. And I think that had a parish meeting, and we couldn't do a thing with that parish because they only had a meeting. They didn't have a council.
Officer Woolrich.
Again, I don't want to prolong the point, I suppose, just for the committee, but it's probably useful for us to just take away the specific point. There are differences between parish meetings with a parish council and parish meetings without a parish council. So there can be, you know, I'm always quite keen just to be in terms of, whilst we can talk in general terms, sometimes it's better to actually look at the specifics and then advise. So I'd probably suggest that between Kate and myself, we take this away. I'm just conscious that probably other points that the committee might want to discuss as part of this item.
If we can lodge parish meetings in SIL and how they are treated, then I think that will be a useful outcome from this meeting. Is there anything else, Councillor Hobart?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Can I start off by saying you can't have a parish council and a parish meeting? There's one or the other. Firstly. Secondly, they have no financial officer of any type or description, which is one of the reasons they stayed as a parish meeting, because they're so small that they didn't want to pay for a clerk's time as part of what their overall expenditure is. And for me, it doesn't, we've not even looked into this. From what I can see, there is nothing anywhere in any of our legal references to deal with this particular problem, and it's now come up. If you wish me to name the parish, I will do. But Mudford, who are next door, are willing to hold the money, use their financial officer so that that money can be spent in Chiltern Cantelope. And I'm asking the question here, for which I have not had an answer, about how we are dealing with parish meetings with reference to SIL and 106.
And I think the answer that we're getting is that it's probably on a case-by-case basis, but there is clearly work to be done for us to identify a more strategic response for dealing with parish meetings. And what Officer Wooldridge has volunteered to do is to take away that to discuss with Officer Murdoch so that we can try to develop something that is more substantial in respect of parish meetings.
Can I make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me? If the next door parish operates very closely with the parish meeting, which in this particular case it does, they have a joint flood committee and stuff, is it possible to get the financial officer of Mudford Parish Council to be able to take responsibility for the SIL money for the parish meeting?
I'm Officer Wooldridge, I'm sure, has heard exactly that point and will doubtless be considering it and discussing it with Officer Murdoch. Okay. Thank you. Good point. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. Firstly, probably an observation, but I do wonder whether we've got things quite right here. This is a planning issue, and I'm slightly wondering why it's come to this scrutiny committee. The planning function sits under climate, environment, and place.
Because it's a resources issue as well.
Oh my goodness,
Councillor Mansell, isn't it? And because
yeah.
it's a resources issue, and because we've taken an initiative in asking for it to come, it's here this morning. That does not stop it appearing at another scrutiny committee if that scrutiny committee feels particularly desirous of considering it.
Possibly it should, because it sounds like many of our questions are planning related and less resources. But it wasn't a strong one. I've seen it here, but I think we do run into these difficulties, and I think we're going to run into it with another item on this agenda, that reports are not always going really where they should be, or at least part of reports. We do struggle with that. Okay, so the question and sort of point of I would also like to raise, it's sort of how the funds, particularly from SIL, are used. From the reports we've seen, it looks like they're all going to projects in the big towns. Now, there are smaller towns and other villages where there is, for them at least, significant housing development occurring as well. I hope there's the opportunity for them to also access the strategic fund, although I sort of see no evidence of it. And I have to say, I've sort of asked this question before and always been pushed away. And I do feel this is wrong, that especially, you know, the amount of housing is increasing, and the impacts of that in the smaller towns, in villages, can be quite great, and their infrastructure needs supporting, as does other areas. But the difference is, it looks like the smaller towns and villages aren't getting, I would say, their fair share at the moment. So I would like to know how that could be rectified, what could be done. It should also be noted that in some areas, you know, much of this new development is on unallocated sites. You know, there were ones that were never intended when the local plan was prepared, and it is having. I can definitely see a cumulative impact occurring as a result of that, which just doesn't feel like it. How can it be? Can smaller towns, larger villages bring forward proposals for development in their area? Where do they take them? What's the process? I'd be interested to know. Thank you.
So, I mean, ultimately, it's a political decision where the SIL allocations are made. But just to make sure everyone's aware, SIL is never meant to be the answer to delivering all of our infrastructure requirements. So the initial work that we did in Somerset West and Taunton, when you looked at the list of infrastructure that was required, you would need to, the ratio was for every £1 of SIL that we were collecting, we needed to find another £2 somewhere else to fund that list. And on that list was probably not, well, wasn't kind of infrastructure requirements for some of the smaller settlements. Some of the smaller settlements, and I recognise that a development of 200 or 300 dwellings might be significant for that village, but Section 106 is there to mitigate the impact of that development. So if the school needs expanding because of the 200 or 300 residential development in that area, there'll be a contribution towards extending the school. The NHS are consulted on planning applications. So if their doctor's surgery needs a capital investment to extend, then a contribution from Section 106 will be made to that. SIL is there to deliver strategic scale infrastructure. And the challenge that you will have as a local authority, if you spread it too thinly, then you have to draw in match funding because it's not going to be enough to deliver everything. And I recognise that for external communities, significant sums of money being spent in Taunton, Bridgwater and Yeovil might seem unfair, but we also need to recognise that a lot of our residents rely on those settlements. So our young people go to college in Bridgwater, Yeovil and Taunton. Many of our residents will access the hospitals in Taunton, Yeovil and Bridgwater. They will need public transport improvements in those settlements to reduce congestion so that people in the rural areas can more easily access those towns. So if you spread the money too thinly, and the same with the kind of flooding infrastructure as well that's going in to protect those settlements, you're protecting a larger number of residents in one go than spreading it thinly and then not really being able to deliver anything of strategic scale or significance. So that is the challenge that as politicians you have in prioritising what is a relatively small pot compared to the list of what's needed. And I would also like to kind of point out that if you live in a house that was built before 1990, chances are your house made virtually no contribution towards infrastructure. And yet now we are loading more and more costs onto new development. The new one is the Future Home Standard and the Building Safety Levy that's arisen out of the Grenfell fire disaster. And like I say, that cake doesn't get any bigger. It's just how you divide that cake up to deliver what are the priorities in your area. So it's not going to be sufficient to deliver everything that people might want to see delivered.
David, do you want to come back?
If I may just test it a little bit more, and I accept a lot of what has just been said, and part of the problem is that the marginal impact, things managed, but you keep adding to things, and eventually, you reach a tipping point, and the infrastructure stops coping. So, the additional housing is causing issues, and it's been really, and so far with new applications, it's been difficult to get that recognised when the applications are going through. I'm particularly thinking of congestion and parking provision in areas where there's been significant development for the size of settlement. Is that all to be put on the new developers through Section 106, or can the strategic SIL pot be used to do that? And I hope it can. And again, the same question about, say, I don't, how is what's the process? How can that be? You know, I hope there's an opening. How does an area go about putting forward a proposal for that? As it appears, you know, the big towns, their interests get looked after, but who's looking after the interests of the smaller towns and settlements?
Ultimately, the SIL allocations go through the Planning and Transport Committee and via the Climate and Place Scrutiny. So that is the opportunity for members to kind of question and challenge where those allocations are made. At the moment, there isn't any allocation for parking in a small settlement or delivering a new car park. I would suggest that at the moment, the funding that needs to be relied on is the significant amount of money that's going to some of the town and parish councils. So if they've had big development and that big development has caused car parking issues, there's nothing to stop them from allocating the SIL money that they've got to increasing car parking provision. But again, the development will have mitigated the impact of the residents' parking. But I suppose what you're suggesting is that those residents are travelling in. I'm not quite understanding the circumstances, and it's very specific, it looks like, to a settlement that you've got in mind. But I would suggest the best place to start is the SIL money that will have been allocated to that town or parish council.
Okay. Councillor Seep.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, can I just say thank you for explaining why strategic settlements are strategic settlements so well, because I think it's something that just keeps getting missed. We have the big towns, they do a different function, and it's a function that supports the whole county and indeed a sub-region around the county. And I think that can't be understated. And it's one of my concerns with the local plan going forward, is that the settlement hierarchy is necessarily a little unbalanced in Somerset, because we have some up by the M5 and some well away from the M5 in a completely different sub-region. And you need to make sure those facilities are available to all, not just established centres. Moving to the SIL report, I thought it was useful, but it is very much a historic narrative of what we've done and whether what we've done was done well. And I think I'm pleased to see that by and large the report says, you know, we haven't got any issues with audit problems of function not working. We do seem to have used the SIL in particular where it's supposed to be used for the you know, for what the government originally envisaged SIL to be for. What I do worry about is whether this report, as it stands at the moment, is adequate to let us, as a scrutiny, advise policy going forward. The new SIL area will be, the new regime will be county-wide, not done in the 4 areas. And you can see that even within 4 areas, there was quite a complicated hierarchy of rates that were capped by the viability, but were intended to effectively level the playing field. One of the features we've seen as a council is a lot of speculative land value raising development in areas which I think we all agree are not appropriate. We've seen some small towns taking enormous application loads, and in some cases the developers are actually proceeding with those before the allocations we do want in town centres and around our major urban centres, because it's vastly more viable. And SIL was supposed to be a mechanism that allowed you to reflect the different potential land value potential in your area and to neuter to an extent the effects. And you can see that in both the Taunton and the South Somerset schemes, where the rates are very different depending on where the residential housing is being proposed. And whilst you can only do it to a certain degree and the regulations are awkward to work with, I would like to see us consider how we might proceed in the future. because if we can level that playing field somewhat, then we will remove some of the economic drive that is leading to the behaviours that we see and don't like. And I think as a committee, we would want to be handing that to the executive in an informed way so that they can set policy. I also don't see within the report any particular analysis of the effects of those zonal changes. And we actually have quite a good sample set because we've got 4 different areas set up different ways. So did the Sedgemoor residual, did Sedgemoor's differential rates influence the distribution of the speculative development, for example? You know, we've got different rates in different parts of the county that we can compare. We can ask the question, does our current regime show the ability to control the inappropriately cited development that undermines the settlement hierarchy and the strategic function of those settlements? You know, so I think it would be very useful to extend the work and ask that question, particularly in the context of a whole of county question, because let's not forget the top end of the county, the northern extremes of the county, are in the commuter belt for a large conurbation, and the land values there are really quite high. And so we may well see some very, very extreme differences when we start considering the more rural areas. And I'm thinking about South Somerset. West Somerset is probably an area we want to make sure is adequately protected, but it sits under a different planning authority. So you know, in terms of South Somerset in particular, we've seen an area I know has seen development around small settlements that swamps the settlement. Whilst you can't necessarily do what Councillor Mansell was wanting of directing the money to the settlement as a compensation for it, what you might be able to do is stop the problem in the first place and actually make sure that it's a level playing field when the developers look at the different sites. So I want to get after more than we've got here. This report gives us a reasonably clean bill of health, tells us what has happened and why, and where we sit today in regulatory terms. What I want is a report that looks at what's happened and tells me, are there any levers that we can pull in policy terms to prevent the harms that we've seen? Thank you.
Right, thank you. And we do, of course, then also have, as you rightly say, what comes next? What is going to happen about a county-wide scheme? So I think we're all interested to know what might happen, for instance, about the current arrangements for Mendip, former Mendip area. And West Somerset is in the interesting position of being substantially covered by another local plan where there isn't open market housing development, so therefore will not really be part of this scheme, but nevertheless significant chunks of West Somerset outside of that could be. So what is the future there? Right.
So we will need to review community infrastructure levy once we've got a new local plan in place. Or we obviously will also need to take into account any changes the government might propose to community infrastructure levy in section 106. In terms of whether SIL has somehow diverted developers to more rural locations, the evidence doesn't support that because the SIL rate is higher in those locations and they have to pay section 106 on top. However, the biggest driver for speculative applications coming forward at the moment is the council's lack of 5-year land supply. That is the major driver for speculative applications coming forward in rural areas. And I totally accept that that undermines the traditional settlement hierarchy that was anticipated in the local plans. Unfortunately, that's not a situation that's unique to Somerset. It's a national issue at the moment, and you're seeing a big drive to get housing developments permitted. in areas that you wouldn't necessarily want to see them allocated as part of your local plan. I think we'll just have to see whether a lot of those sites actually end up coming forward. In terms of SIL, though, they end up paying significantly higher rates. So in the former Taunton Dean example, they're paying close to like in excess of £200 per square metre and £120 per square metre in the former Sedgemoor area. So we collect more SIL in those more speculative areas.
Councillor Seaver, you want to come back quickly, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Ashton.
Just very quickly, in terms of challenge on that, I think what you might be able to demonstrate is that we haven't got the differential high enough, and that there is still more attraction to putting the sites out in the rural areas because they are more viable than elsewhere. I don't think you can infer from that that there's no effect. You can only infer that you haven't had enough of an effect, because the test is viability. You should be just breaking even as the test in both areas. So anyway, but the point I wanted to add was the other thing I would like to see in a report that was to inform future policy is we have some areas where we pull section 106. I think I would like to understand whether we've got the balance right. Are the items which are pulled items which ought to be still funded rather than section 106? Or is there actually a good case for the section 106 pooling? Because it did get stopped at one point, and that rather caused problems. But I think the main issue was just the legacy of section 106. It seems to me SIL is a much more sensible arrangement for example, school extensions. Why you would want to just do those on 106, I have no idea, because. So I would like to see more of a test as to what's in SIL and what's in 106 in the report.
Kate.
So just on the kind of speculative applications, we're seeing those come forward in areas where there's no SIL charged at all as well. So again, it is a national issue, not unique to Somerset. In terms of section 106, so all of the section 106 requirements are obviously scrutinised through the planning committees that they go through. In terms of the positives and negatives of both, so some of the challenges around SIL is that while SIL is index linked and it goes up every year, if you've got a planning permission that was granted in outline, that is when the SIL rate is set. So you will find that some sites might have been granted, they can go on site, they can start the site, so it's implemented in perpetuity. They can walk away from that site for 10 years and the SIL rate still remains as at the point at which it was granted. It doesn't go up any higher. And yet the infrastructure that SIL would be funding from when that development comes forward will have gone up. So these are some of the problems. Whereas the section 106, you can build into the section 106 index linking at the point at which they are due to pay. So the trigger point. So if you've got a development of 500 homes and you're saying at 250 homes you have to pay us X amount to assist with expanding the primary school, there's a clause in there that index links that, and whether they've walked away from that site for 10 years, that index linking still applies at the point at which that trigger's paid. We're also finding with some sites now that we're finding some developers coming forward, or some of the social housing providers are delivering 100% affordable housing schemes funded through grant, and we have to grant mandatory social housing relief in those situations. So there's still money that's lost in those circumstances. So when we come to review SIL and section 106, when we've got the new local plan in place, and obviously taking into account any changes the government's made, we will need to do an up-to-date assessment of what are the positives and negatives of both, because some of what SIL is doing now wasn't anticipated. So when SIL was first implemented, you had to rely on SIL for strategic sites because you couldn't pull section 106. And there was lots of legal advice to say if a developer can parcel up a large site and then avoid section 106, so you have to rely on SIL. The SIL regulations then got changed in 2019, and we were then able to pull Section 106. So that's why in many circumstances we now rely on Section 106 for education contributions, because it's a safer route to ensure you get the money you actually need at the point at which you need it. But yeah, unfortunately, the SIL regulations were implemented in 2010. I can't remember how many changes there's been to the numerous changes to the SIL regulations and clarifications. And some people often, small scale builders can fall foul of the SIL regulations, and it doesn't allow an awful lot of flexibility. So there are positives and negatives to both Section 106 and SIL, and we will need to look at that in terms of what's the best approach at the point at which we review and implement it once the local plan's in place.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ashton, you're here as an associate lead member this morning, aren't you? So could you just make your comment?
Yeah, I'm just asking if there's a way of challenging the allocation between parishes, because only yesterday I was called by a member of parish council where they find a development in their area as being paid to their next door neighbour parish council.
I would suggest you email me and give me the details and we'll look into it. But obviously the SIL is paid to the area that the in. Now we've got some instances where developments can straddle two parishes, and then the officers have to work out which dwellings fall in this parish and the square metre. Now if the neighbouring parish has got the school in it and that's not a SIL liable development, they won't get the SIL from the development that falls in the boundary of the other parish. So if you email me the circumstances, we'll look into it. But yeah, we'll see. I can understand
Okay.
there's a lot of confusion with it.
There's clearly a theme developing here between of issues about parishes that we might need to add to our recommendation at the end. So if we can just park that one for a minute. Councillor Trimnell. We were told that there may be some crackle today, Lucy, but that was spectacular.
Won't upset the system. So I have a number of small, probably quite boring questions. So apologies for that. So firstly, I noticed that in the table on page 49 and also in the table that you had in your presentation, the area south seems to be far below any of the other areas in terms of amounts collected. I'm assuming that's due to phosphates. It's not, so if not, I'd love to know why and what we might be missing out on, what our area might look like, other than probably more paving slabs in Yeovil town centre, but what might we be missing out on in benefits? I wanted to ask, just very quickly, because you'd mentioned it, why SIL runs in calendar years and not in financial years, so April to March or May or whatever. And then I wanted to know, you've got on page 52, 1.5 full-time equivalents to clear a backlog for loading information onto the Exacom system. And I wanted to know, is this holding up progress in any areas? How soon might additional staffing be in place? And will they be easy to recruit? Do they need training, specific qualifications, or are they just, you know, is it a fairly general role and we should be able to get people in fairly easily? And then I've got a couple of extras that have cropped up while people have been speaking. So with the smaller parish councils, if they don't have staffing teams, your big town councils might have a finance officer and people like that, is there support for them to manage their allocations of money, to know that they need to, what they need to use it for, etc. So I wondered if you could just outline that. And then just a brief question about the higher SIL contributions in rural developments. Is this one of the reasons why I think it tends to be general, but we tend to see quite a lot of pulling back on affordable housing allocations later on as the development begins? And is that a factor because of the higher SIL contributions that are required?
Okay, I think I've got them all, but do say if I haven't. So why is still lower in South Somerset District Council? Because they implemented a overall lower square metre charge than they did for the other areas. And that will have been independently verified, that the viability evidence suggested that it was not going to be viable at a higher rate. And obviously what you need to remember is the SIL regulations have changed since then. So they were requiring an awful lot more of the development coming, the larger scale developments, delivering it through Section 106 rather than the SIL. So they've got a lower square metre charge, which means ultimately they will collect a lot less. And also they've been collecting it for a shorter period. So in the former Taunton Deane area, we implemented it in April 2014. And in South Somerset, it was implemented in April 2017. So there's quite a difference in terms of the timescales over which it's being collected. But ultimately, the biggest issue is the rates a lot lower in the former South Somerset area than it is in the former Taunton Deane. That doesn't mean to say that they've missed out on any kind of planning obligations, that they were just collecting far more through their Section 106 agreements. In terms of recruiting additional staff to load on the backlog, we've already got those staff members in post, and they're currently being trained up to get that backlog loaded on. So we'll see how progress goes with loading mainly the historic Section 106 agreement. So the SIL liabilities are kind of relatively up to date now. It's the legacy Section 106 agreements that need loading onto the system so that the team can monitor the trigger points. Because obviously Section 106 agreements can take several years before they pay all the money that's eligible, because they'll have very specific trigger points in them. In terms of assistance for the smaller parish councils, where parish councils choose not to take the SIL to and we have had instances where the parish have said we don't want the meaningful proportion. The council still has to ensure that the money is spent in their area. So and in some instances it has been a relatively small figure. It still needs to be spent in that particular area that it's collected. So in that respect, there is that kind of assistance, but it's much better if the town and parish councils themselves, because they know what they need in their local area, and they've got well, not always the resources, but more so than necessarily the council, to deliver relatively small scale projects in their local community. And they've got more flexibility in terms of how they can spend it, essentially. But if there are any town and parish councils that you've got that are struggling with understanding how to spend their money, we've got the planning obligations email that the team regularly monitor. Drop a query and we'll get back to them. And sorry, I think I missed your question around higher SIL in rural areas.
Yeah, all it was just briefly, does it impact the delivery of affordable housing in rural areas if the developers got to make higher contributions? Or is there, do you see that it tends to be less likely to be, or fewer houses are withdrawn later on, when developers say, actually, we're not going to be able to afford to deliver 30 houses now, we can only do 20. Do you see a greater proportion of that in rural areas, or is it about the same?
No, so the SIL is a non-negotiable rate. So it's generally, it's a given, that's what they'll be paying. What we are seeing though are some sites of kind of under 100 dwellings that have gone through the planning process, have been purchased by a registered provider, and they are choosing to deliver 100% affordable housing schemes. And in those instances, we have to grant mandatory social housing relief. But they are delivering 100% affordable housing, and it's usually funded through grant funding from Homes England's affordable housing programme. So there are some instances where we're actually seeing more affordable housing, but we're then having to grant mandatory social housing relief, and we have had legal advice on that. So there's that funding we then potentially lose, but we gain in terms of more affordable housing.
Thank you. Councillor Sue Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a full report overall. It's good to see we get a clean bill of health, and it talks about the present arrangements, but what we're not actually necessarily talking about is the longer term proposal. Do we actually have a coherent infrastructure plan, which we'll need to develop going forward? The position actually is quite complicated for us with different charging arrangements, different practice historical obligations, and also we have to prepare a completely new local plan, and the government has decided that it wasn't going to implement the infrastructure levy as per the Levelling Up Act. It's going to do something else, but we don't know where and when. One of the questions I would have is we're preparing a single local plan. What is going to be our long-term strategy moving forward from the 5 inherited developer contribution systems to a consistent county-wide approach? And what risks, and this relates to your one pot approach, Kate, and what risks does continuing with multiple legacy arrangements create for infrastructure development? That's one question. And to follow that up, does the current geography of SIL receipts prevent investment from being directed to areas of highest priority? How are we going to address that through the new local plan, bearing in mind that, as you've pointed out, SIL and 106 legally operate separately. SIL is very restricted, and some developers, and I do have an example of that, can take a very parochial approach to that. And also, as well, final question, the SWOT report identified some actions for the leadership team to take. What additional resources, and that's paragraph 17, page 47, what additional resources are we going to be able to identify and bring forward to help to put all this into place? Thank you.
So in terms of a long-term coherent infrastructure delivery plan, so all the legacy plans will have had infrastructure delivery plans underpin them. And the new local plan will require an up-to-date infrastructure delivery plan to underpin that as well. And there may be specific policies for large-scale allocations that will also then explain what that particular development is required to bring forward, as we did with the legacy plans. In terms of what the risks are, in terms of continuing to have multiple legacy arrangements, I think the risk as such is more that, as I've explained, the community infrastructure levy has been changed quite significantly as it's moved along through the process. That has meant that when it was implemented by the legacy authorities, it wasn't anticipated that it would operate in that way. So one particular example I can give you is that when Taunton Deane implemented it, the proportion that goes to the town and parish councils, the percentage hadn't been set. And it was then set at 15% and 25% for neighbourhood plans. That represents quite a significant chunk for some areas. So, you know, that has always presented a potential risk. But going forward, we'll need to look at the point at which we are ready to review SIL and Section 106, what the new requirements might be, what the current SIL, if it's still the current SIL and Section 106 requirements, what will work best for Somerset. And we've learned lots of lessons in each of the areas on the positives and negatives of SIL and Section 106. And the government are now looking to implement changes to SIL to assist kind of small scale and self-builders who have often been caught out by the regulations because they haven't followed the regulations appropriately and then fallen foul of not being able to exempt. So in some instances, developers have gone ahead and started without filling in the forms, and that then reduces their ability to apply for SIL relief in certain circumstances. So there are lessons to be learned, and we will take that experience away to look at what is the best approach for Somerset at the time at which we review it. And like I say, the new local plan will be underpinned by an infrastructure delivery plan. So it'll look at the different areas where we'll be making significant allocations and what is required to support those allocations. Some instances it might be a new primary school or a new health centre. In other instances it might be an extension to an existing primary school and an extension to an existing health centre, but that will all get looked at.
Thank you, Kate. I noticed from paragraph 3, page 44, that the SIL priorities that we have at the moment were approved by, I think it was the Transport Subcommittee, Transport and Planning Subcommittee, on the 8th of October 2024, which seems, yeah, a little while ago now. Are those going to be reviewed as part of this process? And also, in your opinion, have we currently got a coherent infrastructure development plan, bearing in mind all that's been said around the room? And what steps are we going to take to ensure that we have a coherent infrastructure development plan? You know, maybe similar to the it's on the agenda later on. I think it sort of keeps getting to me, but in terms of sort of other policies. So are you happy that we've got a coherent infrastructure development plan at the moment that is actually going to be seen as sound and legal proof? And what steps are we going to take to ensure that we have that going forward? Because you are very much steering us to think about infrastructure as a whole over the whole county, rather than at the moment as specific individual schemes or casework.
So at the moment, the infrastructure delivery plans are those that underpin the current local plans. So they are unique to each of the areas that set the local plan. We will have a comprehensive infrastructure delivery plan to underpin the new local plan. But at the moment, some of those speculative applications are coming forward outside of those local plans. And it's consultation of the infrastructure delivery partners that will then feed into those. So on every planning application, education, affordable housing, the NHS, our highway colleagues are consulted on what is the infrastructure impact of this speculative application, and they will then advise on what is needed to mitigate the impact of that development. So there isn't a Somerset-wide infrastructure delivery plan at this stage. There will be once we've got good progress with the local plan and we've identified where our preferred sites are for allocation.
Can I just ask, what is the timetable and what is the route for bringing forward the infrastructure development plan? What route is it going to go by? Because there has been some debate as to what committee should be doing what. So will part of the brief going forward include a timetable for the development of this, a clear timetable, how members and others can feed into it, and also the committee, I guess the procedural route that it will follow before final adoption?
So the Somerset local plan goes through the Planning and Transport Subcommittee at the moment, and obviously through the Scrutiny Committee. So the timetable and the scoping consultation that we're currently doing at the moment has all gone through those committees. So we've also got the local plan member steering group that's got a select number of members across all parties and a reasonable geographical spread, and they're scrutinising a lot of the topic papers and the policy development. So there's two routes at the moment. We will obviously maintain regular member briefings. So we did one in, I was going to say May, I think, early May or early June. I can't remember. Not that long ago. And those recordings, if you weren't able to make it, I understand, are loaded onto the member information resources page. So if you weren't able to make it, they're available there to watch. But yeah, the local plan timetable, everything's updated on the website with the new timetable. All the evidence-based documents, as and when they're published, are popped on there are on there as well. And I would encourage members and your town and parish councils to sign up to the Planet newsletter so they can keep up to date if there's any changes.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue.
That's fine. All I was going to add was, I think, a little more information about the local plan stakeholder committee, which has some members on. The first I heard of it, and interestingly enough, a colleague councillor, it was the first she'd heard of it as well, was about that particular committee. So if you could direct me to where I can find further information out about that, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. And thank you, Kate, for the report. I think I agree with Peter that there's elements that this corporate and strategy scrutiny committee could perhaps have some further work to come to the committee, because we are about resourcing and we are about making sure that viability things are met. There are viability challenges, and we need to start looking at whether strategically we are able to deliver what we're supposed to be delivering. So I understand a lot of this is part of the planning department's work, which will go to other scrutinies, but I think there is work for this committee to do to really explore whether the S106 and the SIL are delivering for the council what we need to deliver strategically. So I think there is some further work that I would like to see along those lines. One of the things I'm not quite clear about is who determines S106 or SIL, and is it whether you meet the 3 legal requirements that determines you can do it under S106 as opposed to doing it as a SIL requirement. I don't know who's making these decisions. I don't know who's deciding which departments of the council get to put in to SIL requests. So, we've got obviously roads, we've got hospitals, we've got schools, but I know active travel presentations recently have been saying they'd like to, have more money from planning applications. And I'm just struggling to understand who's setting the strategy behind what gets asked for what purposes. So a bit of clarity on that would be really helpful for me. And alongside that, a big thing that comes up is the ICB monies that they get. And we talked about this just before the meeting. A lot of communities get quite concerned that the money's collected for hospital surgeries, doctors' surgeries, and it doesn't necessarily come back to the communities it's been collected from. I know this happened in North Petherton, where they're saying there's real problems trying to get doctors' appointments. My area is under huge pressure with developments at the moment, and the GP practice is already completely oversubscribed, but the ICB may yet decide to use that money elsewhere. And I just wondered if you could just clarify exactly how that works, because many residents are really unhappy that the money collected for certain purposes doesn't always get used to those purposes it was said to be collected for. And that has an importance strategically for communities going forward. I was trying to work out the admin costs, and the North don't seem to have a lot of SIL money, but they have large admin costs. Could you just explain what the admin costs are? Could you break down the admin costs and how they are determined, and who gets what for what purposes? And that would be helpful. And on your table, there's a mention of community, and I just wanted to know, what does any collection for community involve? And strategically, impacts of builders not building out at the rates they were expected to is having huge impacts, because we're not getting the SIL money. How are we strategically managing that if we don't get the money but the requirements are there? I think those are the kind of things I would like to see coming forward in any future report, which are much more about how we strategically manage S106 and SILS to deliver what we need to be able to deliver. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the first thing to mention is that Section 106 isn't for strategic funding. It's to mitigate the impact of the proposed development. And obviously, in terms of who scrutinises that, that is the role of the planning committees. So we can't change the legal agreement that's associated with a planning permission. And the requirements for that site are set by the determination of that planning application. SIL is your strategic pot as such that you can spend more flexibly on. It could be town centre regeneration projects, it could be strategic flood schemes, because you wouldn't fund a strategic flood scheme through Section 106 because you wouldn't be able to demonstrate that that big infrastructure was solely related to the impact of that individual development. So it's important for members to differentiate between Section 106 and the legal tests are very clear that you need to make sure that what you're asking for through Section 106 is necessary to mitigate the impact of that development and that it fairly and reasonably relates to the scale and size of that development. So obviously the determination of what's required is done through consulting infrastructure providers on the planning application. So NHS will be consulted, our education colleagues, our highways colleagues, the Environment Agency will feed in terms of flood risk, our colleagues in the local lead flood authority, and then the requirements that are set to mitigate the impact of that development are set out in the planning committee report, and it's the planning committee that determine that planning application. Once that legal agreement is signed and sealed, we can't just move that money around to fund something else. So there's no kind of strategic approach as such to Section 106. Just to be clear on that. But obviously those individual Section 106 agreements about mitigating the impact of the development. We are having viability negotiations and we're seeing a lot of those, not just unique to Somerset, again, the national issue, because of the additional costs that are being loaded onto development. And in those instances, we are then having to kind of prioritise. But ultimately, it's the planning committee that makes that decision. So if they decide that actually it shouldn't be going to health, we want more affordable housing, it's their decision and it's decided through the planning committee. Officers will make a recommendation, this is what we're recommending, but ultimately it's the planning committee that scrutinise that and determine whether that is the right approach through that Section 106. In terms of SIL and the allocations, and apologies, I didn't pick up Sue's point on this, but the allocations are carried over in terms of legacy arrangements from the previous authorities. And it might look like they've not been done for quite some time, but that's because infrastructure projects take quite some time to deliver. So I'll give an example, the SIL allocation that was made to deliver the primary school at Orchard Grove was agreed about 4 years before it was actually physically delivered and opened. And that's because there's quite a lead in time to making sure that the funding streams have been available. Sometimes the officers who are delivering infrastructure projects will then be able to say, we've got SIL match funding, you know, the Environment Agency, what are you going to put in to support the delivery of the flood project? Or what can we get from government to improve active travel measures? We've got some SIL money. There was some SIL money that supported the funding bids through the High Street Fund. So it allows officers to then go out and look for other pots of money to support the delivery of that infrastructure project. And that's where SIL is a much more strategic opportunity as such. It still has its limitations, but that allows officers, and that's why there's no point reviewing it every year, because these projects take a long time and you can't just move the money around when officers are in the middle of trying to bid for other pots of money. So they take a long time to deliver, and you know, big infrastructure projects like new schools and flood schemes. So that's why they don't get reviewed every year. We will still engage with officers to check, are project's still moving forward. I mean, obviously we would reallocate it if a project got abandoned, but at the moment that isn't the case. Sorry, Dawn, have I answered everything that you were looking for there?
Come back. So where there are viability challenges in delivering, where do the financial decisions regarding that get made?
If planning committee. So the officer will make a recommendation to say that this site has been through viability negotiations. So a developer will submit a viability evidence. They also pay for us to get that independently scrutinised. So we get viability experts to review the evidence. They will check and challenge the figures that have gone into that viability. And they will say, well, these figures aren't right, and we'll change them. Or they'll say they're correct in the market conditions at the moment. And then a viability negotiation will take place. We will engage with the infrastructure providers to say that there's viability negotiations. What is the absolute priority? But ultimately that decision is made by the planning committee. So an officer will make a recommendation and say, the NHS has asked for this, education have asked for this, we're having to take a hit on affordable housing because of the viability, or we've taken a reduction on education so we can still ensure we're getting some affordable housing. But ultimately that decision is made by the planning committee.
Sorry, I wasn't clear. I meant viability in terms of delivering a project further down the line where you haven't got sufficient funds and you have to decide how are you going to deliver it at a later stage.
Infrastructure project?
So it could be any sort of project. It could be anything that you were planning to deliver as part of, but the funds are no longer sufficient. Where do those decisions get?
Ultimately through the relevant committee that decides whether the project progresses or not. I mean, a lot of those go through the executive. I'm probably looking to Scott to help with this, is that capital infrastructure projects are in the capital programme. And if there is a funding shortfall, there will be a decision made. And so some of that might get scaled back. So some public realm improvements, they might look for a lower material cost to go in. So they might scale back what was originally envisaged. But ultimately, it's the officer that then gets the approval through exec, and those go through scrutiny, the key decision that's made in terms of what funding is available to support that project. And if there's a funding shortfall, in some instances, they might then ask for borrowing for the delivery of schools, or I guess in some instances projects will then have to get delayed or abandoned, but ultimately that goes through the executive and the capital programme.
Okay, so there's no scrutiny of those decisions that you're aware of other than through the executive?
Well, it will be through the budget though, I would imagine. The budget is scrutinised, I would have thought.
The other questions I had were about the admin charges and why the North had such higher admin charges on your table, and also an explanation as to what's included within community. And then I'll leave it. Thank you.
Do you mean the 5% admin for SIL?
Sorry, no, your table at the end of your report, annual IFS breakdown. When you look at the third row down, amount of SIL collected, amount of SIL retained for admin, the North has a much higher figure for admin than other areas. And I'm just wondering what the admin figure includes.
Well, it'd be because they've collected more. So the SIL admin is a straight 5% top slice.
It's not the cost, it's not the admin, it's what you've collected. Sorry, yeah, I've misread it. Okay, thank
but
you.
It doesn't necessarily all get, it gets allocated to the staff and to covering the costs of the Exacon monitoring system. If there's an excess, it generally then goes into the strategic pot.
And community in the final
estimate. Community in the last table. So that will be a whole range of figures that have come through Section 106 agreements for. It could be for improvements to youth facilities. It could be improvements to village halls. It could be improvements to allotments. They're kind of lumped together rather than there's hundreds of them. rather than listing them all, they're lumped as community. And then the team liaise with the town and parish councils to make sure they're aware that the funding's come in and it's there for the specific request that was set out in the Section 106 agreement.
So, Kate, this would be detailed pretty much then in the infrastructure funding statement. So these projects that you're just referring to,
There's a great long table at the end.
Very great long table.
Yeah.
And I think we might need to return to that particular document and how that one is looked at, because I'm not aware of any scrutiny of that infrastructure funding statement happening within the authority at the moment in the way that it does with some other councils, most other councils, I believe.
So the infrastructure funding statement is, it's just a document of fact in terms of what we've collected through the year, what's gone out the door in terms of Section 106 to deliver the infrastructure. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's something to scrutinise as such. It's a reporting mechanism to say what's been collected in the year, what's been spent, what Section 106 have been signed and agreed. The kind of scrutiny of that goes through the planning committee, and then ultimately, I suppose, the allocations of SIL that go through the planning and transport committee and via the climate and place scrutiny committee.
But what that does, of course, is to look at it in individual bits rather than having an overall view of how the system is operating and what the overall amounts of money coming into the authority are and for what purpose. And I think my argument would be that there needs to be a broader overview than the mechanism that you're suggesting. We may need to look at that one further, but that is something that I think we might need to mark down for our recommendation. You had a point that you forgot, Dawn. I've still got 4 other speakers. Yeah, clearly, this is an engaging item.
Okay, I didn't get a response on the ICB and our power within persuading them that it should come back to the communities that know they have got issues with GP practices.
Taking you back to the legal test of a Section 106 agreement, they have to spend it to mitigate the impact of that development. So it will go into improving the health facilities that local community rely on. So in some instances, if you take a larger settlement like Yeovil, Taunton or Bridgewater, there might be a number of GPs and there is patient choice. So provided you're in that catchment area for that GP, you might have 2 or 3 GPs you can register with. If you're in a more rural location, you'll only have one GP surgery that you can register with. But the money will still be spent on that GP surgery if it's needed. But they won't ask for the money if it isn't needed. So it does get spent on improving the health facilities of that local community area. It has to, to pass the legal test.
I'm really confused then that money gets collected under the banner of health and what have you, but so many communities are struggling to get the right level of service from their doctors' surgeries because the support isn't being pushed back into those local surgeries where the developments are happening.
So, I mean, that might ultimately be a question for the NHS, but it's the NHS that decide where they need to expand GP surgeries or not. Now, I think there's probably some misunderstanding in terms of how many patients a GP has. So on average in Somerset, GPs in Somerset have between 1,500 and 1,700 patients for one GP. In some areas of the country, that can be as high as 2,500 patients for one GP. Now, the Section 106 contributions are only to deliver capital infrastructure. So if the floor space of a GP surgery is sufficient to accommodate a new GP, you won't expand the GP surgery, but funding the new GP to fill that clinical space comes through the NHS funding. And so that has nothing to do with developer contributions. Developer contributions are there to deliver the capital infrastructure. So either a new GP surgery, or it can be repurposing the existing floor space to create a clinical space for a GP. And then the GP itself is funded through the NHS. And there's also lots of recruitment issues at the moment around getting GPs. You see it in the press a lot, that some communities are struggling to attract GPs to their area. But that developers can't address that funding. They can only fund the capital infrastructure.
Right, thank you. Henry, did you need to come back with a very quick comment?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We've just been told that the 106 is being decided by the planning committees, and in September we are losing the opportunity, all the councillors and the parish councils, in taking things to the planning committees. And what are they going to do about actually setting the 106 if we don't have anything going to the planning committees to actually decide them?
Interesting point. So under the new regulations and the way in which planning has to operate, how will planning committees actually engage with the SIL?
I think that's probably a question to decide as part of the new DM committees, but I guess that they'll be delegated to the officer in those instances.
He's not suggesting that he wants to leap in, is he? You might think about that. One therefore, I think, for Councillor Mansell to squirrel away as a further thought. Indeed, thank you. Well raised. Councillor Lovell.
My question has been answered.
You. It's so refreshing when a councillor says that, isn't it? Councillor Stanton.
Ditto.
I feel doubly refreshed. Councillor Filmer.
Sorry. I'm still going. I will resist the temptation to get into the powers of decision making at committee, though, in terms of planning. The question I wanted to ask was, and it was very much following on from Councillor Sieb. I found this report really interesting as a start for 10, and it feels like there's more to come. And the questions that were asked about Councillor Sieb about future analysis, and particularly looking at the petri dish that we've had in Somerset of the different measures, how they've worked, what impact they've had, I think would be a really useful piece of work for us to be able to look at to inform that going forward. So would very much support that. In terms of just the report itself, I wonder if, just on a technical point, in terms of that table on page 49, I found it confusing in that it mixes up what's happening this year and what's happened to date. Some of the lines refer to history, some don't, and I think just separating that would make it a lot easier to understand. Also, it was raised about the issue of how well the significant proportion has been spent by towns and parishes. I know they have to submit to us to tell us what they've spent the money on. I wonder whether, again, as part of the information going forward, there could be some breakdown, not of every individual scheme, but the sort of areas that money has been spent on and how it has benefited the community and reflected on the developments we've had. And the final question is just in terms of, once we go to a one local plan, one SIL, do we end up with one pot where everything is in across the whole of the county, or is there the ability to have some sort of geographical input to that pot as to where that money should be spent?
Sorry, I was struggling to hear, but so how the parishes have spent their funding, that's all reported in the IFS in kind of alphabetical order. So I would, given that we've got 270 of them, there's quite a lot, but there aren't 270 that have actually received SIL. So I would suggest, if there are particular parishes you're interested in, have a look in the IFS. They're all reported in there, and you can see how they've spent their money. In terms of sorry, I missed the geographical question, Councillor Filmer.
It was just in terms of when we get to the point where we've got the one local plan and we have, in effect, one SIL policy, which obviously will have different rates potentially in different areas, but does it all go into the one pot and be spent anywhere in Somerset, or is there an ability for us to have within there we want certain bits to be spent generally in the area they were raised?
So on the geographical, if we had SIL across the whole of Somerset, it would ultimately, it's a political decision in terms of where you then want to prioritise that. So you could theoretically spend it all in the for larger towns. You could, but you'll still have 15% or 25% going to the town and parish councils, even if we had it Somerset wide. But ultimately, how you then allocate that to strategic projects is a political decision.
Okay. Thank you. So that, I think, is the members in the room at the moment. Councillor Cavill online, you have a question. Norman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, interesting times that we live in. I want to test the future of SIL a little bit, how flexible it is, and how can it operate when we've got community governance review coming up and parishes changing boundaries. West Monkton is an example where we have a proposed development that will straddle two boundaries. If the SIL is paid out early doors on some of the development, then one of the councils could perhaps be the other side of a new boundary line. They could take the SIL away, as I understand it at the moment. And if they don't have the general power of confidence, they wouldn't be able to spend it across the boundary line anyway. So we have a situation there. So how flexible is SIL? Because SIL could be incorporated, or the money could be incorporated in a 106 commitment. Would it be the whole 100% of the SIL, or would it be just the 25% that is owed? Can the SIL then be defined specifically for the parish councils to operate it? As in this instance, the developers wish the parish council to deliver much of the community facilities, public open space, play areas, and some of the employment. So how flexible is this SIL? Can we actually write it down on certain subjects nearly to zero to include it into the section 106? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the particular case that you raised, Councillor Cavill, we are kind of seeking legal advice on how we can perhaps be a little bit more flexible with building into the Section 106 agreement rather than relying on SIL. But the SIL regulations are not flexible because you have to follow the regulations. Otherwise, that's just following the law, isn't it? And as it's set out. And the same with Section 106. You can't spend Section 106 on a strategic infrastructure project somewhere else. So it's not flexible in terms of what you're looking for in your specific case, but we are looking at what the options could be in terms of then, instead of funding the community facilities through SIL, funding it through the Section 106 agreement. But at the moment, the SIL regulations are that if the SIL is collected in that parish area, wherever that boundary is, as a result of either current situation or a governance review, that SIL funding goes to that parish council. And there are lots of cases across the country where you're absolutely right, developments are happening, have a bigger impact on one settlement, but they actually fall in a completely different parish, but they still get that funding. Now, the SIL regulations require that they spend that money within 5 years, so the authority could effectively ask for it back if they haven't, but there's very little control or no control that the Somerset Council has over the spend of that money by the parish council that's eligible for that SIL funding. We have to hand it over.
Mr. Chairman, might I just ask a subsidiary?
Far away, no.
Right. So if something is taken out of the SIL area and into a 106, the question is viability by the developer always, of course. So can therefore the take of SIL be reduced down percentage wise, and how does that affect things? Can it be done on the 25%, or what about the whole SIL? Does it have to be?
So SIL is non-negotiable. It's It's not something that you can negotiate as part of viability. It is what it is. They can only negotiate that after the determination of the planning application by applying for still exceptional circumstances relief. And they would then, the council's got a policy that is adopted in terms of still exceptional circumstances relief, and the developer would need to follow that process. But the viability negotiation is set at the determination of the planning application and still is built into that. So we can't review that still liability as part of the determination of the outline application, because still liability only triggers once they are ready to commence on site. That's at the point at which the SIL rate is determined, once the outline application is granted. And then when they commence on site, that's when we know the detail of the floor layouts and the size of the dwellings, because that will often come through future applications through reserve matters. So it's non-negotiable SIL, unless developers choose to go down the SIL exceptional circumstances relief, which is very rare. I'm not saying we don't have them, we do, but they're very, very rare, and they come later down the line.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a really interesting discussion here this morning. I would like to thank Kate Murdoch very much for answering the questions, which have been numerous and various so fully. The recommendations that you will see on the paper, page 43, for us to note the infrastructure funding statement for 24-25 and the SWOP internal audit services report on the section 106 and community infrastructure levy. I think we would like to add to that, judging from the discussion, and let's hang it on the infrastructure funding statement, that we should look at the next infrastructure funding statement, which is due to be published before the end of this year, relating to the period ending March 26, that we should consider that as part of our scrutiny of the proposed capital programme for 27-28, because it is a very significant potential part of that. So I think that is the way that we legitimately consider the annual infrastructure funding statement. Exactly at what point we get that to look at, I think will have to be a matter for discussion. But I think there is that opportunity for us to be able to continue to look more fully and appropriately for this committee at this. But I think we must also note the concerns that have been raised about the future county-wide arrangements for SIL and section 106, and that we do feel that it is important that they continue to be considered and scrutinised, and in a way that has a whole authority overview. We've expressed concerns about the allocation, fair allocation between and to smaller communities particularly, and I think we need to note those concerns. And we've also asked officers to consider the position of parish meetings and how they can access and benefit from the SIL funding. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Jim. I'm just trying to interpret what you've just summarised in a way that makes sense.
Comes to something when someone has to interpret what I've just interpreted, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I see this committee's role as being more strategy than specifically planning policy.
Indeed.
And the reason we are looking at these documents is in order to decide strategic approaches, shall we say, in order to inform policy development. And in this particular case, we've had a debate around, for example, the researching of effects, which I see as a separate process from the regulation consultation that takes place later, once we've got a local plan, there will be a SIL consultation. That is about the formal steps of setting it up. But our interest is in what questions is that SIL consultation going to ask? What is that SIL consultation trying to achieve? And I just thought it was worth, you're nodding vigorously, checking that we're not standing on the planning policy committee's toes.
No, absolutely.
We're looking at this from a corporate strategy point of view.
That was a very fair interpretation of my interpretation. But I think we are absolutely agreed on that. I think it is very important that we do not overstep the bounds of our remit. But nevertheless, there are issues that are appropriate to us, and we should be able to investigate them and to point up ways in which the authority can work better. That's what we are here for. So are we reasonably clear about those recommendations? Yeah? Okay. May I see all those in favour of them then, please? Any against? Right, thank you. We have gone on for quite a while, so I'm going to suggest that we have a 5-minute comfort break. 5. It'll stretch into 10, might we know that. 5-minute comfort break. Thank you all very much, and thank you again, Kate. Kick off, ladies and gentlemen, if we may. So we've got agenda item 7. Which is the Somerset Council Corporate Plan. You will find this on pages 55 to 110. And I'm going to invite Sarah Hawkins, Head of Assurance, Performance and Risk, and Joe Walsh, Corporate Strategy and Policy Manager, to present the report.
Good afternoon, members. Thank you for having us today at the Scrutiny Committee. Scrutiny will recall that in April we attended to discuss the corporate plan structure alongside the council vision. Since then, full council have adopted the vision, and we've worked alongside corporate leadership team and the executive to develop the draft corporate plan, which is included in Appendix A, pages 63 to 95 of the reports back. The document is intended to translate the council's refreshed vision, a fairer, better future, into a clear set of strategic actions and measurable outcomes centred on 3 core missions: opportunities, connection and homes. It's an integral document within our golden thread and connects the council vision to service plans. This is included on page 57 of your reports pack. It clearly outlines what strategic actions we're going to take to deliver the 3 missions over the next 18 months, but doesn't include day-to-day transactional or operational activity. It is not intended to cover everything that we do as an authority. We are considering how we make visible critical enabling activity that indirectly supports the delivery of the corporate plan actions and outcomes, and how this interplays with service plans. As mentioned, we've worked alongside the executive as well as the council's corporate leadership team to develop what actions have been included, and will continue to work with them as we move into setting targets for each of the performance measures and the measurable milestones for each of the actions. Whilst reviewing the actions, we've encouraged leaders to consider the 4 principles that were approved within the council vision. These are outlined within Appendix C. The structure that we've used with the corporate plan is aligned to what was discussed at the previous scrutiny meeting. We have a clear flow between the council mission, either opportunity, connection or homes, the outcomes we seek to achieve, which were previously reviewed by scrutiny and agreed at full council, the actions that will support the delivery, and the performance measures linked to the outcomes that will measure how impactful delivery has been. We're really keen to reiterate this is in draft formats and will be considered by executive in August. The feedback that we received from scrutiny in April helped shape the new council vision, its missions and principles, and we've also utilised that feedback when producing the corporate plan. I'll now pass on to Sarah, who's going to run through how the corporate plan will help strengthen performance reporting moving forward.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. So our quarterly performance report will have a new look and feel through 26-27 as a result of our implementing our corporate plan. And that really is about moving towards more outcome-focused reporting. So the performance report will comprise the progress against our corporate plan actions, as well as the refreshed set of performance measures that are detailed within the corporate plan that you have in your packs. And as you know, we bring that quarterly performance report to this committee on a quarterly basis, as well as executive. The aim is really to provide, as Joe's just touched on, that clearer line of sight between our council vision, the outcomes we're seeking, our priority activities that we've identified, and the performance information that will really help us understand whether we're on progress, whether we're on track. So as you can see, that will shift us more towards outcome focused reporting, and it should make us make it much easier for us to understand the impact that those actions are having. And of course, we also want to bring into that how we celebrate some of the success where we can see improvements as well. So in practice, what that will mean is that there'll be a smaller number of service measures, and those have previously probably formed a really significant chunk of our corporate performance report, but there'll be a smaller number included in corporate performance reporting as we move towards more strategic measures focused on those outcomes. Just for context on that, so through vesting day and our performance reporting, we heavily focused on service measures, making sure that we had that line of sight on service stability through vesting. Last year, we refreshed them to include a few more strategic measures aligned to our then council plan. And so this is really that next step to really focus that performance reporting on the vision and the improved outcomes that we've set ourselves as an organisation. Having said all of that, we do also recognise that some of those service measures are of significant member and public interest, and or areas that we really do want to keep an eye on. So therefore, the new performance report will also include a set of what we're referring to as high priority measures, and those are included in Appendix B on pages 97 to 99 of your pack, and we really welcome your feedback on those. They have also been informed by previous discussions with this committee through the quarterly reporting and the suggestions that have been put forward throughout the last year. In practice, the corporate plan delivering corporate performance measures will continue to be tracked through the Council's IdeaGen risk and performance management system. Really important that we ensure we've got clear ownership for our actions, milestones and measures, and owners will be required to provide updates on a regular basis and to review by exception through the directorate leadership teams. So the Corporate and Strategy Scrutiny Committee are asked to consider and provide feedback on the proposed content of the corporate plan in relation to the actions and corporate performance measures, and identify any additional actions and performance measures that the committee would recommend that are included. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Right, the first speaker to catch my eye is Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this. It was very easy on the eye, very easy to read, very easy to pick things out. So I really commend you for that. I did like it. I have a couple of questions though. I noticed that the targets are defined as increase, decrease, maximise, minimise, or achieve target number. But what does that mean? Because if we have one fewer, to pick a thing, one fewer late planning determination that you have reduced. And so, you know, I would understand if it was just reduce or increase, but where you've got minimise, there must be a number. Where you've got maximise, the same. Where you've got achieve the target, that should be the same. So will that be evident to us going forward? So if I make that my first question.
So absolutely. So by the time we share with you the first quarterly report, you will have performance measures targets set as you would currently see them. So for now, we wanted to make it clear in terms of whether it was maximise, minimise, etc. We are working currently with measure owners, action owners to really make sure that we set those informed by the activity that we're delivering and also some of the benchmarking. So as part of that, you know, making it clear, is this about we want to be above national average, for example, or is it a more local target? So that work is ongoing. Unfortunately, we couldn't get that done in time for committee today, but it will be there as part of the Q1 performance report.
So just to be quite clear, page 98, 99 will actually be redefined so that there will be measurable targets.
Yeah, and not just so I believe pages 98 and 99 have the high priority measures. So it's also within the corporate plan. So all of the measures that we've got under each of the outcomes, they will also have targets set. So that's our aim. Oh, good point, Jo. So it will also include milestones. So you'll also have visibility of the milestones under the actions so that you can get a better idea of the progress towards delivery of that action.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, I suspected that would be the case, but I just wanted that confirmation, really. And then, so I think I have asked you a similar question on something different, and I don't remember what it was, but I'm going to ask it again. So we're looking around sort of page 67, 68, or page 5 or 6 of 33, depending on which document you're looking at. I've got 2 page numbers on everything, which is helpful. So these education targets are good ambitions, and I don't have any problem with trying to improve education outcomes and experiences for our children who worked in education. And so absolutely anything we can do to improve it is wonderful. However, we've got measures such as O1J, which is the percentage of EHCPs that are completed within 20 weeks. Now, I can see entirely how we, the council, have complete control over that and how we work to meet those that target. But for example, on O1L, and which is exclusions, and O10 attainment 8. So I've just picked 2 educational measures which are schools led. They are schools determined. If you have a student or a number of students in your school who are causing constant disruption, and schools don't exclude willy-nilly. They don't, there's no idea. I know sometimes people think they just get rid because it's better for their books and things, but they really don't. Having worked in education, I was often the last person who would teach a child before they said, this is now, we cannot, we've tried everything, if you get what I mean. And there are times when exclusion is the only option. And so I wonder how we are going to work to reduce exclusions in schools without putting additional pressure on schools who are already under pressure from everything and everywhere to keep students in school where they really shouldn't be there. And things like Progress 8, how on earth can we influence that other than through things that we do as a council, ensuring that we have libraries available and, warm spaces, and that we are trying to create employment so that parents can work, all of those things. How are we going to affect those? I can see Heather has a hand up as well, but I don't understand how we can have that set as a target that we have to be measured against when, what control do we have?
I don't know if Heather wants to come in first, and then I'm happy to add in terms of the work we're already doing on exclusions.
Thank you, and sorry for jumping in from the back of the room. Just to say, I absolutely hear what you're saying, Lucy. It does, it is one of those frustrations, but certainly we do have a responsibility as a local education authority to be measured against certain targets around exclusions. We do have a moral and a statutory duty to ensure that children are in school, and also like across children's, every part of children's, and actually not just children's, but as a council, we do have to work with our partners to ensure that progress is made. So we are not shirking away from the fact that we have influence rather than control very often over some of these issues, but certainly our transformation plan is very key, that we must make every efforts we can to ensure that these things happen in our schools, in our partners, both the ones that are trusts, for instance, and the ones that we have more control over ourselves as local authority maintained schools. So yes, it's frustrating, but I think it's a legitimate thing to be holding us to account on because we have that accountability for it.
So I don't know, you may be about to answer it, but how do we influence attainment 8 in our secondary schools, including in academies? What actually can we do as a council?
Sorry, again, Chair, if you don't mind my coming in. It's a very good question. We can certainly do briefings on this for you, but we do routinely work with schools where they may be not performing as they would want to be performing. So we will put in specialist teachers or support teams around schools that aren't working in the same kind of way. Secondary schools are more of an issue for us because we only have one within our local authority maintained status, so it is a little bit harder, but that doesn't stop us from trying. But you are right, it's a shared endeavour. Like a lot of the community health issues are shared endeavours, population health is a shared endeavour. That shouldn't just, somebody once said, just because something's hard doesn't mean to say we shouldn't try. And I think that is what councils are and local education authorities, let's say, are expected to do. We carry a lot of the accountability, but not many of the direct levers. So we have to pull the levers that we can and work with it. So we have, there's all kinds of school improvement panels where we track progress and try to make sure that we anticipate when things aren't working as well as they could be. But it is a challenge.
But yeah, I was just going to add on the exclusions, that is something we have been tracking through 25-26. Overall, in terms of exclusions, we have been at a higher rate compared to other local authorities. So there is targeted work in that area, in particular looking at an alert system to try to prevent and reduce the number of exclusions and to make sure that interventions are sped up and aren't too slow. So we have seen an overall improvement through towards the end of the back half of 25-26 in terms of overall exclusions. So we did feel it was important to continue that through and have that in the corporate plan.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. And yeah, really interesting. And as Lucy has said, very clear. So thank you for that. I'm still a bit confused on the terminology used on the right-hand side. How did you decide whether something was maximise or something was increase? I'm just not getting the nuance as to how you decided to code one maximise and one increase. And I do have another.
I take your point, and sometimes it was like, which is this? I think where there might be a limitation on how good we can get it, it would be an increase and we'll set that level of what that increase is. Whereas maximise, we would look to, there's less limitation on how high we can go, would be a really basic way of describing it.
Yeah, it's a bit fluid then from the sound of it, but yeah, okay, thank you.
What we didn't want to do, I suppose, is not have anything. So
I'm just not sure why they couldn't all have just been increase.
Well, I think it's increase, maximise, decrease, minimise. It's that degree.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, I'm not going to dwell on it too far. The other point I wanted to make was in the high priority measures, the page 97, 98, there is nothing to do with education in there that I can see. So there's nothing about SEND, there's nothing about the foster placements. I'm just curious why none of that has made it into the high priorities.
So that would be because it's in their actual corporate plan measures. So if you, in the main body, I'm just trying to find, have we got a page? So if you looked on page 67, there's a number of measures related to SEND. So what we've done in terms of those high priority ones is really look at, okay, what's not included that's linked through to those outcomes that actually the committee and the public may still be interested in. And that's why in terms of their nature, they tend to be a bit more, some of them are organisational health, for example, so sickness, staff turnover, breaches in terms of contracts, purchase orders, as opposed to something that is more outward looking.
Okay, then the priority measures are things that are not already encompassed somewhere else. In effect.
Yeah, they're those measures that we feel a small set of measures that we feel will still be of member interest or public interest, and that we feel are important to include and make visible within our corporate performance reporting. They're not part of the corporate plan, but they will be part of the corporate performance report alongside the corporate plan, progress against those actions and the performance measures that help us assess the impact of the actions in the corporate plan.
Sorry, I'm being pedantic here, but how will the weight be then applied if you've got some that are within the plan and some that are priority measures? How will you, I'm just trying to work out how they will all be affected.
It will be clear in the plans. So in our corporate performance reporting, so what we'll do is we'll present that by the outcome areas, the 3 mission areas, and within those, the specific outcomes. And then we'll have a section saying, and these are also the high priority measures with some narrative on the high priority measures. So they'll be covered and clear within the corporate performance report what they relate to.
If I may, it may be a clarification that we can include in the report moving forward, adding the word such as additional, so that it makes sense that we have the corporate plan measures as well as the high priority measures rather than in isolation.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I've got a number. I'm hoping I'll do most of them really quickly. There's one I'm expecting to pay a bit more attention to, but so I will try and do that. First one is on 03, page 72, to do with supporting business. And the outcome is that that support should include to fair, environmentally responsible and sustainable for future generations. I didn't see any evidence of that in the actions, or it wasn't clear in the actions. I felt that an action needs to be added so that outcome, how we get to it, is clear. Possibly it should also apply, well, I feel it probably should also apply in 02, particularly regarding skills. So that's a suggestion. A question, I'm interested what it is. So this is on 04. We've got an AI growth zone. I don't think I've come across that before. I am wondering, what does it mean? And I would kind of like to know.
It says we haven't got one.
It says it in 04.1. It's got AI growth zone. Yeah. So what I want to know, so I'm getting comments from my side. What I want to know is, what is it? What is it that what is this AI growth zone? What do you mean by that? What does it look like? What's it's involved? Some of us might like to know what impacts it might have. So I don't know, exactly what you mean by it. Where we got to? C3, page 79. I'm all for it. I couldn't help notice libraries appear a lot, and I'm all for libraries. And clearly, there's someone in the team is a fan of libraries as well. I'm not knocking it at all, but I was amazed how often they popped up. And I thought I should just raise in relation to C3.2, as it says, integrating libraries in community prevention hubs. I'm interested to know, because we have 2 types of libraries now. We have the council libraries, and also part of the council network, we have the community library partnerships, which involve more volunteers. So I'm hoping both are being taken into account, and don't see a distinction being made at the moment, which perhaps is good, that they are both being covered, but possibly it should sort of say, and community library partnerships in places. C4, page 81, it's got about enhancing digital infrastructure, broadband. Sorry, no, it's C4.3. I think enhanced digital infrastructure, but one of the key issues is the coverage. Because of the problems with the contracts, we've been fairly large parts, especially in rural areas, are being left behind on broadband. So coverage is a key issue which needs expanding, and might not be quite captured by enhancing. So if expanding could be included. Right, page 82, D1. C50 performance measure to do with active travel. I just felt it was a bit weak. So percentage of adults who've engaged in active travel at least twice in 28 days. Again, how will that be defined? What does it mean? It sounds as though it means next to nothing, but perhaps you've got more in mind, but that bit of feedback for you. Page 85, C7. Okay, yeah, this seems quite important. So it's to do with the local plan, and it's not really sort of got that much under actions of the local plan, but the local plan can deliver some of our climate ambitions in a big way, and I really feel an action needs to be in there on how the local plan will be addressing the council's climate ambitions. Okay. Right, I think now's the one I'm going to say most about. So this is C8 on protecting Somerset's natural environment and supporting action on climate change. Okay, so what now so firstly in C8.4, this may be a good thing. Well, I expect it is a good thing. Just slightly wondering what it means and if you could tell us a little bit more. So this tells us we're going to have a system-wide community of practice to support the council's 2030 carbon neutrality target. So again, you know, what is community of practice in this context? What will that be delivering? I expect it's a good thing and I'm all in favour of it, but would like to know a little bit more. And actually, I will just pause here. This is where actually I was starting to think all of the scrutinies need to be involved with this. It's just come to corporate scrutiny, and this is now sort of emphasising. You know, I think each of the other three scrutinies would be wanting to look at their areas, and as a member of the Climate Environment Place, I'm on both, as is Henry. So you know, I'm taking my chance now because it doesn't appear to be coming to the others, which I think is it should be. But anyway, I'll take my opportunity now. Now, something which the former Climate and Place Scrutiny Committee often raised and over quite a long period, and we've got it here about to support the council's 2030 carbon neutrality target. Now, again, you know, I absolutely want us to move as quickly as we can on that, but I believe, and I believe it's clear, is we missed that 2030 target. It was challenging when it was set in 2019. And we've done lots of good things since then, definitely. But we've never had a clear plan as to how to get to that 2030. And increasingly, we've not been doing what is needed to do it. You can't flip a switch on this. It needs to be planned and you need to start be moving in it way in advance, but, you know, possibly a decade or more. And we've not been doing enough of it. And it means it looks illiterate now because I think it's clear that target has already been missed by decisions we've already taken. And just one example, if you look at nearly all of the relevant policies and strategies, and I've been aware of it as we've been going through, they've not referred to the 2030 target. It was too challenging for them, regrettably, because we've left it so late. Now, it was unanimously cross-party agreed at Climate and Place Scrutiny that target needs being reviewed. We've kept saying it, and I'm afraid we've been rebuffed, we've been ignored, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep pointing out the council's looking stupid by doing this. It needs reviewing if we're serious about it. And as you gathered, it's something that concerns me greatly, because if we don't have a credible target that we can work towards, it means we don't do it. And it doesn't indicate a degree of seriousness, and it really does need review. I'm willing to contribute positively to this, and I hope the executive notes that. I've been on many working groups, and I don't know what the executive is scared of on this. You know, I've contributed positively, and nearly all of the working groups I've been involved in have been welcomed and accepted by the executive. You know, those of us who want to work with you and do this, and I am so frustrated that this is not being dealt with in what looks to me a serious matter. And I know the executive gets very precious and very defensive on this, and you need to stop. You need to start listening to serious feedback that's been given on this point. Okay, so that, you know, putting that target in there, it lacks credibility for me, and I think, you know, we need something that is going to guide us sensibly. Now, sort of adding to that, there's I feel a lack of what our climate emergency declarations, we certainly wanted to get the council's house in order, and that is important, but we also wanted to be contributing to how Somerset as a whole progresses, and that was always a key part of the declarations that we made back, as I say, 2019, I believe, for most of the councils at the time. There's a lack of Somerset actions, I feel, on here across the field that's needed, and I'd mention on energy, including to well, obviously new buildings, but retrofit for insulation, and we need to be getting that much better than it is. I would say for me, and probably on a performance measure, heat pumps make such a difference that we should be including heat pumps as one of the key things we're aiming for. So, but there is more. There's others which we may find more difficult, but they're needed within reasonable extent. But our diets are important. I'm afraid some foods, if we choose to eat and grow them, they have a big impact. We end up giving over most of our farming land to feeding animals because we eat a lot of meat. Just reducing it a bit, being more plant-based is needed. All the scientists say so. I know some people find it a challenge, but do we pay attention to what the science says or not? So there does need to be something on that. Something else which has been found more easy, which I don't feel is reflected, is on transport. We need a modal shift, and we were happy to talk about it previously, but there's no sign of it in here now. So less car journeys, more people on buses, active travel.
Dave, I'm
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
there are other people that do want to speak. I know it's an extremely important issue.
I've done on that one, and I was moving on my page to another couple of just short ones now.
As long as they could be really short.
They will be. But this was the problem, it not going to all the scrutinies, which it should have done. Okay, so my next one is page 80. Oh no, that's what I've just been. C8.2. Yeah, here we go on page 88. Fly tips. It's got a performance indicator to do with whether they're addressed within 5 working days. I think we also need a performance indicator on the total number of fly tips. That's important too. Okay, H4. So I didn't write down the page numbers now, but yeah. So this is on healthy homes. So in that, I think heating and insulation energy impacts of homes needs to be included, and isn't at the moment. And Faye, finally, on the high priority, I won't even go there, but look at it because I remember. But page 99, I feel high priority. As councillors, we've been mentioning that the council is not performing well on planning enforcement. And I really think that needs to be a high priority for the council, getting it sorted out. And I think, most councillors would agree on that, because we keep coming to it and finding it's not being dealt well. And the other one in there, which feels, I would say, is a high priority, is on getting our climate action sorted out. We've taken the corporate team right down to a minimum, and it's just showing time after time that we're no longer delivering on what we say we want to do in the climate field, and that's a problem. I'll leave it there then. Thank you.
I want to just ask Richard Wilkins to come in, because there was a direct challenge to the executive, and Councillor Wilkins' hand shot up immediately, and I think it's only fair to ask him to respond. Having a debate between scrutiny and executive.
Thank you for indulging me, Chair. I just wanted to talk about the 2030 climate position and how it's impacted, in particular, my area of highways, in that having that target has really driven everything that we do in highways. It is part of everything we look at. There's a lot of things we look at, but the date of 2030 has had a huge impact on how we do things. whether it's the junction at Wellington, through to how we look at our lights, and everything. It's vital that that target is there. Now, I'm not one to say whether we're going to meet that target or not. You know, that's not for me to say. But having that target is instrumental in guiding this council, and certainly my department, in how it approaches the work it does. You can shake your head, but that is absolutely fact, and it's something that's discussed at every level on every project, and everything we do. That we're part of Live Labs, which was working on decarbonising stuff. We were early adopters on that. We've done so much work in that on that. It really is. It really has shaped things. So that is my slight pushback. But but it is vital that everybody in every division gets behind the work that is being done, and actually encourages that sort of work, encourages how you say. And just a quick another thing, you'll note that in the plan it mentions the local transport plan, and that's where a lot of the information you say is missing sits in regard to that. I'll leave it there, otherwise I'll get told off by the chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilkins. Councillor Trimble, you wanted to come in very quickly, but I do want Officers Hawkins and Walsh to respond to the points that Councillor Mansell made.
It's not anything about the points, but I'm sure Councillor Mansell could call it in to other relevant scrutiny committees if he wanted to, and then have that discussion there.
Indeed. So, officers.
Thank you for the questions. I think one thing that's worth noting is that we've collected a lot of this information from heads of service and directors across the organisation, so we may have to go back and clarify a few points with them, but we'll do our best in terms of getting through the questions that were raised. So in terms of the environmental business support aspect, having discussed this with the head of service for economic prosperity, there will absolutely be some climate change environment support for businesses moving forward. It won't necessarily be included within the corporate plan, but we would expect to see it within their service plans and within specific project plans as things come forward within their business support initiatives. The AI growth zone question, again, relying on some previous knowledge and discussions. AI growth zones are a government initiative that will support businesses operating within that sphere across the country. My understanding is that localities will need to bid into government to have that support within their geographies. Again, understanding is that we are in that process of reviewing whether or not some of that could be one of those locations moving forward. We can chat with our colleagues in economic prosperity if you would like to see some further information on that, share it. In terms of the library services, yes, it will include both types of libraries. The ones that we are in control of in terms of the ones that we manage, and the ones that are community-based libraries will have different mechanisms in terms of delivering it. So again, having spoken with our head of library services, there are ways in which we would want to bring that all together, but it would also rely on the contracts and procedures that we already have in place with those community libraries for their delivery. The question around broadband coverage, we do have performance measures in terms of looking at the coverage across Somerset. Appreciate that there are rural areas that haven't necessarily benefited from the previous Connecting Devon and Somerset scheme, and we will be highlighting that, I'm sure, through the Project Gigabit programme, which government is leading on with our support in Somerset to deliver moving forward. But absolutely, there'll be a focus on the rural areas and making sure that their connections are either delivered through fibre, wireless, or better levels of 4G, 5G coverage across the area. The local plan point around it being perhaps reflected as a little bit light within the corporate plan, I think there'll be aspects within the performance reporting in terms of the milestones that will cover that in a lot more detail. So we will be following our planning team's kind of guidance in terms of what those milestones look like, which are reported back into respective planning committees. It may look like that, given previous conversations, we all know how important it is within the council's corporate plan. Just because it hasn't got kind of coverage within the document doesn't undermine that in any way. The environment community of practice. Again, my understanding from speaking with the head of climate change would be that that community of practice is made up of internal and external organisations to see how we tackle this as a system within Somerset, rather than working in isolation. But I would like to clarify that point with the head of service before kind of giving a real formal answer. I think Councillor Wilkins has covered the point around 2030, but it does drive some of the activity that we've listed within the corporate plan document. There's a couple of specific points there in terms of things like heat pumps. Again, we would want to refer that back to the head of service because we wouldn't want to overcommit them to something that, from our position in terms of the corporate side of things. You mentioned a couple of performance measures which you would like to see included within the report. So fly tipping, we can absolutely add that as a contextual measure to say how many we've had in total, as well as how many we're dealing with within the time period stated. And planning enforcement data, we will look at how we can include that as well moving forward. Sarah.
I think the only one to add is the active travel. So we will take that one back to that team to see if there is anything else that could be added in or consideration. Can it be made stronger, more ambitious? That's what I was hearing.
Right, thank you. The high priority points that Councillor Mansell noted.
Yeah, but I think so that covered the fly tipping, so we can add in the contextual data under the high priority fly tipping. Thank you for your feedback on planning. That's exactly why we've included some of the planning service measures under high priorities.
So it was planning enforcement and climate as high priority. That section, Appendix B, I think it is.
So, so planning enforcement, we can absolutely add in more in the high priority because we've got climate measures and climate actions as a core part of that corporate plan. That's where those performance measures related to climate will sit. So, for example, if we did have something on heat pumps, that's where we'd add it in. And the high priority are things that don't necessarily directly align to those missions, but we still feel will be of interest, as we covered earlier. And so the climate we would put in the main body against specific corporate plan outcomes and actions.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions, Dave, and thank you for the comprehensive responses. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I'll try and be as brief as I can be, because I'm well aware that it's pretty hot, stuffy environment, and we still have other items. I'm just going to be very brief. I do feel with Appendix B, and it's been raised before, and I would certainly support that. I think we need to have much tighter definitions than increase, decrease, maintain. I think you need to put some sort of numbers on that, because one is a doubling of two, but 101 from 100 is not that great. So I think that needs strengthening so as people can see exactly what it is that's happening there. Also, as well, and this is probably more one for executive than here, is there's an awful lot of priorities there. But are our ambitions realistic in terms of what we can really achieve, bearing in mind the constraints we face financially and in terms of what transformation may or may not be able to deliver? And also, do the proposed measures tell us from a resident's perspective whether their lives are improving? Because at the end of the day, this is all to benefit residents, that residents' lives are improving, or simply whether what we're measuring is just a tick box of completed activities, which might mean a lot to us, but not a lot to residents. So on the whole, I think the direction of travel is fine, but I do think the framework needs strengthening in terms of how we demonstrate clearly to our residents how success is going to be measured and reported back from a resident perspective. I don't think we put a huge amount in there, and that's probably quite a challenge.
Okay, thank you, Sue.
Thank you for your feedback. I think absolutely right. I think there's more that we can have in there around, for example, customer satisfaction. We do our resident engagement survey, so we can certainly look at that and look at what we bring in, therefore, to our corporate performance reporting. And just in terms of the performance measures, we will absolutely have specific targets. So when you see the corporate performance report, it won't say increase, minimise, maximise. It will be a specific target, and you'll be able to see where we are in Q1 against that specific target in terms of where we want to get to by the end of 26-27.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Councillor Seeb. Oh, sorry, do you want to come back, Councillor Osborne? I think
No, I don't think there's anything at this stage. I just think it's really important that we don't forget who we're doing for, because at the end of the day, it's our residents that pay the bills, and it's our residents that want to see what they're getting for their money. And at the moment, the way we report, sort of everything seems to be geared internally, not necessarily externally.
thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I welcome the new Councillor Osborne, because we seem to be agreeing a lot. I'm just going to state the same problem a slightly different way. A lot of the measures of effectiveness which are in here seem to be service oriented and not necessarily end outcome oriented. In other words, they're not citing an aim or an objective. They're citing a service, if you like. And I suspect that probably reflects the fact that these have been drawn up by service leads, service heads. So what they're doing at the moment is what they're measuring, and that's the way that they think about the problem. And I think this has resulted in a number of interesting artifacts in the plan. It sponsors some particular technologies rather than sponsoring the outcomes. I'm thinking broadband, when actually the outcome is connectivity. There are no parts of Somerset that can't get Starlink. It's an economic choice not to use it. So you know, we're throwing officer time. We're throwing officer time at tiny benefits, when actually it's the outcome for the person that we're interested in, and maybe that's where we ought to spend the money rather than chasing broadband in every single fibre-based broadband in every single instance. Nevertheless, you know, that connectivity and exclusion were what I had expected to see in the objectives, not a specific technology solution. And I think that really comes over beautifully with your points about the AI centre. I really don't want to see those, because I know that NASA is currently chewing on 1 million satellite constellation that is solar powered around the world and will provide all of the infrastructure you ever needed for AI, but do so using sunlight and not taking up land and taking up power that frankly we need to power heat pumps. It's also the measures, I think, miss some of the really obvious impediments and getting after those. And I know it's not strictly council function, but at the moment, for example, our small businesses, and 99% of our businesses are small businesses, are really struggling with delivering climate change infrastructure because of things like huge delays from the network service operator on G99 applications, which are this isn't a normal one, electrical grid applications. So if you want to put in a battery that has a bigger than 3 kilowatt inverter, you want to connect your inverter with the solar panels in parallel with the battery. You know, this is the sort of thing which pops it into the human brain has to actually sign it off. And that in Somerset at the moment is a big drag on our electrical installers and our PV installers. It means that they can't plan their business as well. So it pushes up the cost of everything for the people in Somerset because they're suddenly having to delay a piece of work and so on. This is an example of a service that we as a council need for an objective, and it's not being delivered, and it is in the economic development area. But that sort of intervention where we call people to account, in that case, the network service operator and or the distribution operator, and say, you know, it's just not good enough. How do we get this better? You know, that's the sort of thing that we as a body politic could be doing that isn't appearing. I also noticed you know, some sort of orphan technologies in there as well. So you know, I was a bit surprised at that. The main thing which I find disturbing about this particular document, if you go back to our minutes at the beginning on page 36, you'll see what we said about the document on the last pass, and you'll see that the first point we made was about play as a council commission function, you know, delivering playgrounds, delivering opportunities for school play during the holidays. These are things we do that build confidence in it and language skills and socialization in the infants at the very beginning of their life, and they provide enormous welfare benefits for parents as well. And it's a very, very important function. We said this. The executive considered that. They said that it was obviously a bit awkward because they hadn't actually got play written in the corporate plan, but they did come back and offered to do some specific things, calling it early intervention in the minutes of the executive, which are also linked from this document. So you can go and check those, and I did. And the function is still there, and yet it hasn't carried through to the draft of the document. The word play does not appear in the context of children's play. The early interventions that are mentioned in the documents are not they're early interventions in the children's social services form, not the providing places that actually let young children develop into very good feedstock for our schools. It is that whole systems engineers intervene early, get the language skills and the socialization preschool, so that when they hit playgroup, when they hit school, they are actually able to participate, and they are good seeds to put in that seed bed. So I'm just disappointed that something we made so explicit has failed to carry forward. Rant over.
Thank you, Councillor Seeb. I don't know if you have any particular comments you wish to make in response.
We might do a bit of a tag team here. So in terms of the performance measures, and thank you for your feedback. So it is a mix. So there are some service measures in there. Some of the measures also do align to the new local outcomes framework that LG will be introducing soon. So we have done that read across. That's not live yet, but we have considered those. So some of those are actually within our corporate plan, where we've got that alignment as well. In terms of play, so you're absolutely right. We brought the council vision and missions to Scrutiny in April, and I think what we can do is take back to see if there's anything further, probably in C1, which is under connection, in terms of supporting children, young people and adults, and also potentially some of the planning SIL area, as to whether we can get some actions in the corporate plan related to play. So we'll go back and we'll have those conversations to see if there's something we can bring in. So that, yeah, this is the sort of action level. Back in April, we were more at that, the higher level in terms of our vision and missions, but we'll take that back for consideration.
Okay, good. Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. 3 points. First one, page 86, C8.8. I'm not sure whether this is about nature recovery strategy. Local nature recovery strategy was launched last week. Very interesting conference at the Cricket Club. But we have things called, well, I mean, they're rather grand called ecosystem engineers, but actually they're wet furry animals called beavers. And we need to be very conscious in thinking through our strategies about beavers, because what I learned at 2 different meetings last week was that we're going to get lots more of them. The Honeygot estate on Exmoor, on the Bristol Channel side of Exmoor, the River Alla, there is a beaver enclosure, which is very interesting. I visited it. But they have now started to release beavers into the wild. Natural England has had permission for a year now to give licenses to release beavers, and beavers are being released. They're coming south from the River Avon. We've shown a photograph of a breeding pair that have produced 3 pups within the last few months. And there are positives and negatives that everybody needs to be aware of. I mean, the positives are, we all think of them as building dams, don't we? And natural flood management is very well done if you can get the beavers to build the dam in a useful place. Often they don't. And there are all kinds of regulations that control whether if they build in one place, you can move them to another. I mean, you can, but it's complicated. And in relation to our using this £50 million flood resilience fund we've been given, we're going to have to do a lot of thinking about natural flood management upstream in all the catchments, and beavers will need to be a part of it. But the negative side, and I was at a presentation by a Dutch engineer over in Cambridgeshire a few months ago. It was the Environment Day of the Association of Drainage Authorities. And in Holland, they have a lot more embankments, dikes, what we call bunds, than we do. And the beavers are wrecking them because they tunnel from underwater and they tunnel from above the water, and they connect the 2 tunnels up, and they're often 15 or 20 meters long. And in the end, they cause floods. So dealing with and rectifying that is expensive and difficult. So we need to think really actively that they are in and mentioned specifically in the local nature recovery strategy to help slow water flow, create wetland habitats, improve water quality. But just I'd like everybody to be conscious of and mention to anybody you can influence or is connected with anything to do with water and embankments that in 20 years' time, beavers are going to be an asset and a problem at the same time. So we need to be thinking about it now. I just had a couple of other points on page 92, H 3.3. It says support neighbourhood plans. That's really not enough. We should encourage neighbourhood plans. I mean, they get neighbourhoods a lot more sell money, as we've seen in the earlier discussion. And in a situation where the government is going to manage, control planning nationally much more actively, neighbourhood plans are potentially even more important in doing what's right for a particular neighbourhood or community. And page 94, H 5.3. I'm now the Vice Chair of Children's Scrutiny, so I've suddenly got interested in this. Foster parents. I know we've had lots of campaigns on fostering, but really fostering is the best way to get to grips with looking after children whose parents can't look after them or who are in trouble and who need care. So there's going to be a campaign to encourage counsellors or council employees to become foster parents. I've been one myself. It's not easy, it can be difficult at times, but it's something that huge numbers of people have the skills to do. Lots of people have been parents, and particularly when the children have grown up and left home, might have space for as well. So can I ask everybody to work very actively on getting more foster parents, because that helps solve a lot of the problem with children's provision running out of control, which it nearly is at the moment.
Right, thank you for that. I think they're things you can just receive, so you don't need to comment. Thank you very much, Councillor Stanton. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to agree with Councillor Stanton. We do agree on most of the flooding problems and so on. I've got a much more serious point. Going back to section 73 and the AI. Don't need to go into it anymore, Mike. You brought it up. We're talking here about the Bridgewater data center. I'm going to give you a few facts and figures because it is absolutely shocking. The requirement for the electricity on the Bridgewater data center is over twice the total usage of our residents at the moment. So 1.2 million houses can be powered by what is proposed for a data center. That data center will require somewhere around 88 jobs. I repeat, over twice the electricity for every resident in Somerset and 88 jobs. At least at the gigafactory, we are talking about 11,000 jobs, 4,000 in the factory and somewhere around 7,000 in associated industries. It really worries me what is being proposed. And I'm going to just flip over to Virginia, which has that problem at the moment. And their electricity price for the residents has gone up 16% this year. Why? Because the data center uses a continuous amount of electricity day and night, and it doesn't fluctuate. So the electricity companies are much happier supplying the data center than they are the residents because of the fluctuation you get morning and evening. Whoa, somebody doesn't like us. And it seriously concerns me that we are not actually registering what is likely to happen to our residents if we go down this particular route. And I don't know quite what this council can do, but we really need to actually have some answers. And my final point is that to produce sufficient solar energy to power this plant, it is 300 acres under solar panels. They're registering their problems with this. And if you've got any answers, I'm willing to listen, but it's Mike wants to come back in. I do think it is a genuinely serious point about what is happening to the cost of living, and this council is supposed to be looking after its residents.
I think it's a point, Councillor Hobhouse, which is extremely important, well made, is being heard by everybody in the room, particularly the executive members, and indeed by our officers as well. I don't know whether in the context of the corporate plan, it's necessarily something that we can dwell on too much this morning, partly because it is too important. We don't want to tack it on to the back of something else. It needs to be considered more thoroughly elsewhere. But thank you for registering that. Councillor Stanton, was there something you needed to add to that?
Well, it might be slightly wicked comment. Obviously me. Or might be my pacemaker, actually.
We didn't have the heart to say that to you.
I did work on data centres for 10 years before I came on this council. Two things, really. One, it's not going to change because we're all going to go on using our computers and use artificial intelligence more and more. So the data centers are there and we're stuck with them. If we could stop them producing Bitcoin, that would save a huge amount of energy. And that's, completely pointless activity and damaging in my view. Just interesting, are people aware that 5% of land in this country is covered by golf courses? You could put solar panels and wind generators on all of them.
So that really is a contentious point for this morning. Officers Hawkins and Walsh, is there anything that you want to finally say? Otherwise, I think what I would remark is that we've had an interesting series of points that have been put forward, which will have been recorded. I'm not entirely sure that it really amounts to huge differences to the recommendations other than the points that have been made. However, I think the overall point that has come through from a number of speakers is that we do need the document to be outcome focused and customer focused. And dealing with too many of the little mechanisms sometimes means that it does lose that focus. I think that's one of the key elements that's come forward from this morning's discussion. Councillor Osborne having particularly made that point.
Yeah, it's just another thought, but some of the outcomes that we have in there rely on us working with third-party organisations that we've no control over, particularly the schools, where a lot of the schools in Somerset are run as academies, so we have got no say in what they do or don't do. How are we going to ensure that our outcomes are not too adversely impacted in the event that one of the partners we work with, one of the external organisations, NHS, academies, whoever, that our performance isn't impacted adversely if they do something that impacts their performance?
Very interesting and valid point. And again, one that I think is worth us recording as a concern. Officer Hawkins.
And just to add there, so our risk reporting, which will come at the same time as the performance report, will absolutely align to the new mission and outcome areas as well. So we will be looking at what are the risks to delivery. You'll also get the narrative. So each of the actions will have milestones in terms of delivery. So across the performance and the risk, we will be able to hopefully manage risk to delivery, but also aid understanding of our progress towards them.
And Chairman, finally, just one more question. It's probably one that's for executive, and maybe it's one we do address to executive. Is that there's an awful lot of priorities on that list. How are you going to prioritise the priorities, bearing in mind that we are limited for financial and capacity resources as well?
I think that's a perfectly legitimate concern for us to raise, that you can have documents with so many priorities that you don't actually achieve enough of them. So again, I think we can register that as one of the concerns from this morning. I'm going to suggest then, ladies and gentlemen, that we've now had a good debate there. We have identified a number of additional actions and recommendations that have been recorded. The overall issue, as I say, I think we do need to make sure that we're looking at outcomes and outcomes for the customer, and make sure that that is the real focus of the document rather than necessarily every single little bit of mechanism for that. Members happy with that? Right. Can I just say that we are due to be having a workshop. We're not going to make it, particularly those of you that feel that you've got to eat. So I've suggested that it be put back by half an hour. So we'll begin the workshop at 2:30. So that is your focus, ladies and gentlemen. From now on, we've got to get through the remaining 2 items on the agenda.
Chair, I've planned my day round and finishing at 3:30. Sorry that I shall have to leave early. Can't we just stick with where
we can be really focused on the workshop. I think
get it over quick. Thank you.
So agenda item 8 is the reserves policy. I don't know. Oh, we do have Clive. And
you
Clive,
do indeed.
Before we start, can I just say that I think this might be your last meeting with us now that the permanent 151
it is indeed,
has been appointed.
Subject to council ratification on the 15th. Yes,
indeed. That's right. So can we thank you very much for your time with us and the very significant contribution you've made to the council as a whole, and particularly to this committee, which we do appreciate very much.
Thank you, Chair. I very much enjoyed working with the committee and wish you well for the future.
Thank you. So I don't know if Liz is also online to present this or not.
Liz is, yes.
Liz, hello.
I am, Chair. I am online. Thank you. I've been listening to the beavers and wonder where they fit into our corporate plan. I'm looking forward to seeing the performance reports for the beavers in Somerset.
Indeed.
But apart from that, I am really glad to have this reserves policy come forward, Chair. I think this is a really important part of our financial governance, and I'm as grateful as anyone can be to Clive Heafy for his time with us. subject to full council on the 15th, of course, with our appointment of a permanent 151. I think the work that Clive has done on our financial governance and also on the risk that comes with finance in a local authority has been second to none. And I'm really grateful that he's been able to spend this time with us, which has been incredibly helpful to the future of the council. And we've not, as you realise with the CIPFA FM review, we've not shied away from understanding where we need to improve and where we need to get to in order for this council to be good. And financial management, of course, affects absolutely everything that a council does. So I'd just also like to say that financial position is slightly different from financial management position. So I think our financial position has certainly improved through the reserves situation. This policy coming forward is not the actual review of reserves. That is to come later during 26-27. And I realise that there's quite a lot of work there still to do following vesting day. I know that sounds a bit ridiculous in some ways 3 years on, but there is still work to be done. So policy first, then review, and I look forward to the route that will take through scrutiny executive and then to full council for the next budget setting. So very happy to hand over, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. So Mr Heafy and Officer Nix.
And thank you for your kind words, Councillor Lation, appreciate that. So what you have before you on page 111 is the cover report for the reserves policy, and page 121 in your full pack is the policy itself. Councils are required to have a reserves policy alongside the reserves that they hold. We don't have one at the moment, so it's been a lacking that we want to put right, and a lacking that's been picked up by the external auditor. So this policy is in line with CIPFA guidance. It's not quite as regulated as Treasury Management, for instance, where we are heavily regulated in what we do and how we do it. But what's referred to in paragraph 8 on page 122 as CIPFA Bulletin 13 coming on the back of LAP Bulletin 99, for those who are technical, to set out what's expected of reserves and balances within local authorities. So we're following that guidance from CIPFA. The Local Government Finance Act 1992 requires councils to consider the level of reserves when setting a budget requirement, and as you know, that comes into the thinking every year when we look at the budget process. And my Section 25 report under the Local Government Act 2003 requires me to formally report on what I consider to be the adequacy of proposed reserves when setting the budget as a personal opinion based on my professional judgment. So that's what you'll get to see, and that's what my successor will be talking to you about when it comes to budget next year. A well-managed authority with a proper prudent approach to setting and managing its budgets and its finance should be able to operate with a level of general reserves which are appropriate to the risks. So it's always difficult to quote a percentage or a figure that we should be holding. It very much is related to the level of risk that we're facing at this moment in time, and that's why it becomes a subjective and professional call, but the auditors have a duty to report on that as well. On page 123, I take you through the various types of reserves. So we have reserves as a working balance to cushion the impact of uneven cash flows. So for instance, we keep an election reserve that we top up in years that there are no elections, and we spend in years that there are elections. And by doing that, we don't unduly influence the budget in any one year, we just smooth it out. We can use it as a contingency to cushion the impact of unexpected events and emergencies that happens. These happen from time to time, and we need to be ready for them. And we can build up funds sometimes for specific purposes as well, which we often choose to do. What we don't hold reserves for is in order to cover shortfalls in the budget or a failure to make savings. That's done by good financial management and making sure that when we set the budget, we spend to budget and no more than that. And reserves are not there to use that. It doesn't mean as a result, last resort, we couldn't do that. We can do, but it's not good practice to be relying on that. We talk about our reserves on at the bottom of page 123 around restricted and unrestricted reserves. Restricted reserves are the ones that have conditions attached to them from government, or where we hold reserves on behalf of third parties such as schools, and where we can't use those. Unrestricted ones are those where we've got some options and choice around how we use them. Again, we don't use them lightly, but nonetheless, we have options and choices around that. And I liken it to a number of jam jars on the mantelpiece. Many of you will have heard me say that before, that when we talk about jam jar accounting, when organisations that have lots of small reserves for little things tend these days to have larger pots of reserves for bigger things, and rather than many. So we are due a review that Councillor Lation talked about, and my successor will be doing that as one of the early pieces of work. Nicola Hicks has already started thinking about that. Section 14 talks about usable earmarked reserves, and how we manage them follows those same principles that I talked about above for managing risks, to hold for investment purposes, for smoothing purposes, to give some resilience, etc. So they're all the good reasons why we hold them. And when it comes to creating reserves, we can create new reserves at any time. That's entirely up to us, apart from the ones that we are required to hold. So, for instance, we have to hold the dedicated schools grant money that we get from government when we get it. That will have to be held in a restricted reserve that we can only apply on the 31st of March 2028 towards paying off the DSG deficit. So that'll be one we can't control. In this policy, we're setting a level of £5 million as being a de minimis level. So I have the power, the Section 151 officer has the power to create a reserve below a value of £5 million as part of the day-to-day management of the functions, which you would give to any chief finance officer. But above that threshold, we suggested that we ought to be bringing the creation of reserves to executive for decision to create them, so that executive can keep a close eye on any of the bigger movements on the reserves rather than every one of them. On section 17, the guidance points out that for each earmarked reserve, there should be a clear protocol. This is for each and every one individually, setting out what's the reason and purpose that we're holding that reserve, how we can use that reserve, when we should use it by, who can release it, will be in that as well. So who's got the power to say, yes, I'd like to use that with the Section 151's agreement. Procedures for how we manage and control our reserves and delegated authorities related to that. And a profile, we should always have a profile of how we think we plan to use it. Otherwise, reserves can sit there for a very long time unused and get forgotten. And indeed, there are still some reserves that we have in the system that date back to the legacy authorities, where the exercise to clean them up should be cleansing those. Indeed, I've asked a few senior officers, what is that reserve for? And the answer's been, don't know. So those are the ones that we need to really clean up. So I don't really want to go through too much of the rest of the policy. You've got it there in front of you, but I endorse it as being in line with our strategy, in line with SITFA's guidance on the way we put the reserves together, and very much in line with good practice for management of council finances.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Heafy. Ms. Hicks, is there anything you want to add at this stage? You sure? Right, in that case, I will turn to members for questions, and I have got Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Right, I wasn't quite expecting I'd be called that early. One of the things, this paper's already gone to executive and it's already been approved at executive. So there were a couple of questions I possibly couldn't ask because it was executive as opposed to scrutiny. One of the things I flagged up in that report that went to executive last week, and unfortunately I'm struggling to find it in this one because I was using different systems, was that there was a risk that the transformation reserve, or the EMR reserve at the moment, earmarked for transformation, may not be sufficient. Now, I know the answer was, well, flexible use of receipts, of capital receipts is funding that, but it's not funding everything, because there are some things flexible use is not allowed to do. So what I'd like to know is, what is the likely split between flexible use of capital resources and the other side of it where it's got to be funded from reserves. Because my concern here is that transformation is doing the heavy lifting. That's been made quite clear. We're expecting a hell of a lot of it in tandem with the pay and grading review as well, that the two run very close together and are actually quite fundamental to the success of both of them is fundamental to the future stability and the finances going forward, along with everything else of this organisation. So what I'd like to know is, what are the key indicators that you are going to use to tell us or to tell me as an opposition spokesman that what that balance is going to be between rebuilding the reserves and investing transformation, and that it's actually working over the next 12 to 24 months? That's what I'd like to know. Another point as well is, you're talking about reserves, and you've already mentioned it, Mr. Heafy, that a lot of those sort of earmarked reserves are probably historical legacy pots from the districts. And there may well be, and I'm wondering what opportunity there is going to be for existing members who now represent those old areas divisions to be able to have a say or be consulted on what reserves are retained and perhaps which jam jars are drained in order to support the work on transformation and any other things that have come along in the meantime. How are you going to do that consultation? And also what I would like to see is that the September review report actually comes here first, so we can have a look at it before it goes to executive, who then make the decision. Because if it goes to executive first and they make the decision, we can say what the hell we like. It's too late. The decision's been made.
Thank you very much.
If I may leave the governance point to my successor to deal with, I think it's more appropriate dealt with in that forum. Generally speaking, this is a policy paper, so I'm not trying to draw out the actual numbers in any of the reserves for you, other than say part of the budget setting process is to look at the adequacy of transformation funding, and transformation funding can come from a number of sources. The bulk of transformation funding for us comes from flexible use of capital receipts. That's from the sale of commercial investment properties, which is put aside to fund transformation. There are very strict government rules around how we can use that, and that we also have to submit a strategy at the start of the year on how we plan to use it, and a report at the end of the year on how we have used it, but that will fund the bulk of the transformation. Capital receipts can fund other parts of the transformation that wouldn't qualify under the strict criteria for flexible use, and there'll be a revenue reserve, which is what I think you're pointing to there, which will pick up other things related to transformation that probably wouldn't qualify for either of those two. So I'm afraid you're in the complex world there of how we use those different reserves, but rest assured part of the role of the 151 is to look at the adequacy of transformation funding and to make sure there's sufficient money from those three sources in order to be able to provide you and me with the assurance that I need. In terms of legacy reserves, again, I'll probably back that one onto my successor. I'm talking about some reserves here where nobody has a corporate memory of what they were for, in which case my recommendation would always be to wrap them back up into general reserves and build that pot, because that general reserves still do sit below the levels that I've indicated in my section 25 report. Of course, if there are some which have been sitting there for a while, we know what they were for but no longer are used for that, there is a different debate to be had then with members about the use of those. So I think again you may well find it's not a straightforward approach. It's the two sides to things.
Okay. Can I just follow that one up about which reserves things go to? Paragraph 34 on page 127. Need to build earmarked revenue reserves to improve resilience and support transformation. Any underspended outturn will be transferred to the business risk reserve unless otherwise recommended by the section 151 officer. Could you just remind us of the nature of the business risk reserve and why should the monies be going to that rather than to general reserves?
The general reserve is a fund of last resort. I didn't highlight it in the paper, but it says that the general fund contingency is a last resort fund. We would only use that in exceptional circumstances, something major happening of the nature of a COVID disaster, that kind of thing, where the council may want to go to look at that. The business risk reserve is one that looks at under and overspends. So executive approved some further spending for children's services, for instance, of 5 million to give them additional resources to deal with SEND. That will come from the business risk reserve, because that's linked to a service pressure that we need to deal with. So that's dealing with day-to-day service pressures if we need to spend reserves, and again, I don't do it lightly, whereas the general contingency is to do with last resort funding.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Seeb.
So three things. I'll start off picking up Councillor Osborne's point again. The
fraternal feeling is becoming quite disturbing.
I know, people are going to start talking about it.
The very good point is that elected members often go back a lot longer than the officers, and when you're seeking to find out what reserves are for, it's always worth talking to the member body to find out if they remember. So I would recommend that happens when the review takes place. Secondly, the substantive point that I wanted to make was that the report does not give clear guidance as to the level of risk cover required, or the separation of risk. Sorry, we've got interference here. Or the separation of risk cover. So if you look at page 127, paragraph 30, you rather point to the general fund risk, but general fund balance reserve as being the primary source of risk cover. I would agree with your verbal statement that it's actually the last resort cover. It's the insurance policy, but your plan should be to cover these things with various risk reserves, which are allocated risk reserves. And usually when you're deciding the size of a risk reserve, you have some minimum criteria, which is rational. Because risks over a basket of different risks do not all have the same probability of outcome, the odds of them all happening is near zero. There's usually a benefit from pooling your risks. There's nothing in the paper about the pooling of risk, so I would have expected, for example, something like 66% of the of all identified risks to be the level that you would want to cover, because you usually get a third benefit from pooling them. Just historic. There's nothing in there other than the general SIPFA guidance for the general fund, which is a fairly heavily banded figure in paragraph 32 by the time you've adjusted it for our circumstances. I understand what you're trying to do. I'm just thinking it's worth setting some minima, some rational minima, because but equally it may not be for you, it may be for your successor. But I just think in principle the policy ought to be, this is how you set up a risk reserve, this is how you make sure that the same risk isn't being covered by two reserves. You know, you've covered it and it's covered there, so you're not locking up taxpayers' money unnecessarily in an earmarked reserve. But I think by and large, I think this is a great policy, and it lays out everything except that treatment of earmarked risk, which I would have hoped for. So thank you for your service, and thank you for a clear report.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to go back on your first point, I think it is worth changing to reflect the last resort wording. I think on reflection, that might be a reasonable change to build into that policy in due course. On the second point, you'll recall it's the budget papers each year. When we do the budget in late February, early March, it's those papers that set out the reasons for the risk and the percentages that apply to each one of them. So I would refer you back to the papers in, I think, 4th of March, was it, when we did the budget, which contain all that analysis. But But essentially for the general reserve, my recommendation is we run at 10% of the net revenue budget as being a reasonable level related to the risks that we face. And I set out the risks in that report.
I can never tell whether I'm being heard over the noise here. Right, okay. So thank you for that clarification about the budget. I think that is a good point and ought to be in the policy as to remind budget holders that they have to consider that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So hopefully that will be something that can be incorporated. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you. Do I just keep going? Yeah, okay. So I hope you can hear me, Clive. Yes. I want to know about the reserves policy. Is it something that councils are expected to have? You said we haven't had one, and I wondered if there was a reason for not having one, and has it caused us any problems? Has not having one been a problem? I wanted to know how much we've used from reserves actually since 2023, I guess, or even 2022, have we actually taken any money from reserves, and how much? And then I just want to ask about these jam jars, because I partly expected maybe to see a list of the jam jars and the amounts in a table on this document, and I guess it's not the right document to have that. So where would I find that information? Because I'm just thinking back to when the budget setting was done earlier this year, and we were under the impression that if the council tax wasn't able to be raised beyond 5%, then that was it, and then money came from somewhere, and obviously it must have come from some jam jars, I presume, or something. And I wonder how much of these jam jars are actually visible as reserves jam jars, and how much is just buried within budgets that we don't know about.
Oh, there's no burying, Councillor Trimnell. We don't bury them. So the budget report set out all of the reserves and listed each one of them. So again, I will point you to that, and Nicola Hicks will give the committee the links to the relevant reports so that you can see them. But they were completely listed out there, and we continue to be transparent as we require to be. The lack of a policy is something that I've noted, and something that the auditors noted as just not following good practice. How can you manage reserves if you don't have a policy to manage your reserves too? So this really supports what we should be doing, and probably it was one of those documents that wasn't picked up as part of LGR, which we now have to rationalise and pick up. So I think it's a timely time to get this in place. We haven't suffered as a result of it, but we've not been operating to any policy framework, and it more means that reserves then become a bit more ad hoc and subjective about their use, which they shouldn't be.
And in terms of the amount that's been used from reserves, or if any?
It's all laid out in quarterly reports, and it's all laid out in the budget. So again, Nicola can direct you into those, but it's complex because we are moving money in and out of reserves all the time. We do that. We're putting money in for DSG, and we're moving money from various pots. So, but that's all documented in the quarterly reports that the council gets, and in the budget each year. So it's a trail that can be followed through, and Nicola will do the committee a briefing note on that.
That's brilliant, thank you, and good luck in your future endeavours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sorry, Nicola.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Heath, you just had the grace to apologise, so that was good. Is there anything else, ladies and gentlemen, that we want to raise on this? I think the report is generally welcomed. Obviously, there have been one or two comments and maybe one or two clarifications, which in the light of our conversation can be made. Nicola, is there anything that you want to add?
No, obviously just a reminder to the committee that we are doing the review, and that will come forward, taking Councillor Osborne's point about the request to see that ahead of executive. So I'll take that away and have a look at that with the team. I will do a briefing note just to summarise the movements gone in and out since 2023. Hopefully Copilot can help speed up that for me.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a suggestion, bearing how long the discussion we had this morning on the first item, which covered quite a lot of on the section 106 report. Sorry, it's the heat. Sorry. What I was going to suggest was, bearing in mind that there's quite a lot of these jam jars, reserves around. Some of them will have a historical context. And I wonder whether it's worth us, rather than having a huge, massive debate in September or August when it comes to us, whether it would be worth maybe, even if we do it online, sort of having a workshop on this, on the initial draft, to get our thoughts on that, rather than wind up having a marathon scrutiny session. Because I suspect that other members may well have views on what reserves. The issues come when you try removing reserves, not necessarily when you're going to add to them.
Okay, I think that's a helpful point, which I'm sure can be considered.
That's fine.
Right, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take it that we're in agreement with the recommendations. Okay, good, wonderful. Thank you very much again, Mr. Heathy.
Thank you very much.
And our very best wishes for your future.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So our final item is agenda item 9, which is the forward plan. You will see that we've got a hefty meeting coming up in August. And a hefty meeting potentially in September as well. Lucy?
No, I was just sighing at hefty. I feel as though most meetings are becoming hefty these days. So when we speak about hefty, are we talking all day or just lots of items within 4 hours?
I think that particular meeting we do need to try to contain a little bit if we can. A lot of it is annual reports, to be fair, which we ought to be able to receive and not subject the reporter to mass scrutiny. I think we ought to be able to receive reports. However, Pugsley's law of meetings is that they expand to fill the time available for their completion. So we will try to contain that meeting to something not very far beyond lunch if we possibly can. We are being pressed all of the time for additional items to come forward to our meetings, which I suppose is a good sign. It is a sign that scrutiny is actually working because we are getting the reports coming to us. However, we do need to make sure that we're not deluged, and we do try and parcel the reports out fairly between meetings. So that is what we have coming up on the agenda at the moment. Now, are there any feelings about things that are currently on the list, whether or not you think they're in the right place, and if not, whether something needs to be shifted or added? So I've got Sue and Mike at the moment. Sue?
Yes, I was just sort of looking at that and wondering whether there is any capacity to move some of the August items into September, which only has 3 items at the moment. I know that could change. So as we've got a more balanced agenda, and also can we to this, that the item we've just discussed, the reserves policy, that it is going to definitely come back in. Because if it's on our work plan, the odds are it will. If it's not, I wouldn't want it to slip.
Okay.
And that's.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. We need to add on the 9th of September an additional item, which is reconsideration of local community networks and whether elected Somerset councillor members of them should come to a decision for each one as to whether they want it to continue or not.
Yes, I think we're still waiting to see what the detailed guidance is, aren't we, from the department about what the future of devolution needs to be before we're bringing it back, which I suspect is why it's not on the programme yet. It's anticipated that it'll come in September, but we need to have some of that final detail about what we're going to be made to do. So it's anticipated, I think, that it'll come in September, but it's not actually yet formally there because it'll all be part of the same bundle.
That's right.
Would that be?
But it should be there, even if we then have to move it to a later meeting. We need to have it on our list.
Well, we can add it. We can add it to the September meeting, and then, if necessary, defer it.
Yes.
Yeah, happy with that.
Chair, just a couple of points. First of all, another item, has been just added to September meeting, which is the council tax reduction scheme and exceptional hardship policy 27-28 scrutiny consultation response. If you remember, the consultation comes also to scrutiny for scrutiny to give feedback on the consultation questions that were part of the discussion also at the task committee group as well. In terms of the items which are already on in the agenda for August, I'm afraid there's real big difficulties trying to move these items around. Two of those are annual reports from executive leads, which I presume it will not take time. The other one is your annual report, Chair, which will need to be presented to the full council in September. And everything else are quarterly updates as well, which are timed in. So it does look busy, but with the proper management, we will try to, as you said, if the officer presentation is shorter, then we can give more time for debate by members. In terms of the LCMs, what Councillor Stanton is bringing up, and see my colleague is nodding as well. This is really down to when we are receiving the guidance and further report from the colleagues from the community who are working on community working review as well.
Why don't we add community working review into the forward plan for September? And then, as we've said, if necessary, we can always defer it or move it around. But at least if it's there, we've put down that marker, haven't we? The thing about the August meeting is that it will be down to the firmness of the chair and the continence of the members. In all senses, probably.
You are chairing that one.
Indeed. Right, Councillor Mansell.
Yeah, just thinking about the LCNs. This is very much connected in as well, though. At least how I see it with the community working review. So I think that's a key point as well. But it needs to be connected to that as well as from the government. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, and again, just something we'll to take away, certainly in terms of all the comments and feedback you've had. But we also need to add in the meeting in October, I believe. The meeting on the 14th of October. And I think we just need to look at scheduling around how we can perhaps smooth some of the items.
Not to just nick my question, which was, could we make use of an October meeting? But
well, there definitely is an October meeting. It's just that at the moment there's nothing scheduled for the agenda, so that needs to be looked at, I think. But as I say, one of the things that's become very apparent over the last few months is that we seem to have items that are being volunteered for us to look at, and additionally, members identifying those things that we need to look at. So the combination of things.
To October.
Oh.
Yeah.
I am determined to get REPA to this agenda. I really am. Right. Is there anything else then on the forward plan, ladies and gentlemen? Right. Now, look, this has been a marathon session, but actually it's been a very valuable one. I know it's been hot. I know some of you got very bothered, but nevertheless, some of it, most of it, all of it has been extremely valuable, very much to the point. And I do thank you all again for your engagement. I thank our officers for their support. I thank our executive members for their attendance. And that gives us just over half an hour before we're due to begin the workshop for you to go and buy your lunch. Thank you so much.